if somebody wanted to come to me and somebody was like, I am a socialist, I think we should abolish all capital, I would fiercely disagree with this person, but let's have the debate, you know? I think I could defend a liberal capitalist system really well. I don't think most capitalists could. The reason why I have an issue with a lot of the populist framing is because I would argue, it lets them set things up as like an us versus them. It gets them past the policy arguments, and then it makes it so that they can start to make a bunch of arguments that I would argue aren't being made in good faith. So like a big example of this would be, I'll just make up a person and call them Masan, would say something like, oh, like, I just want people to have affordable healthcare. And it's like, well, that's not, most of the Democrats already believe that. There's a lot of liberals that believe this, but they want to get past the policy argument and just argue for their figures, but then we don't actually have any of the, like, the mode of economic production arguments or anything like that. But because their political project, and then, again, I'm not asking you to accept this, I'm just saying it from my perspective, because they are populist, they see themselves as like, because this is such an us versus them thing, we can start to use what some people might consider less than savory forms of argumentation to further our things, even if that means misrepresenting our point of view, misrepresenting our politics or whatever else. And then that's like the huge hang up that I'm in. If we were having a massive debate right now in the United States over like, should we become socialist versus should we remain capitalist, whatever, I think that would be a fascinating conversation. And like, I'm not one to push back on a society and say, this is evil for us to move in this direction.
Liberalism finished. It was born in the Enlightenment era revolutions. It stood for liberty, equality, fraternity, for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But today, hundreds of years later, is it just out of ideas? Is it time to move on? One of the most common criticisms made against liberalism today from all over the political map is that in an age of widespread searching for vision and purpose and meaning for individuals and for societies, liberalism just doesn't have the juice. It's an ideology of old people and even older ideas that does not speak to the challenges of the modern world. I would bet that a lot of you feel this way, in part because I don't think many liberal commentators take this kind of critique very seriously. So if you've ever felt any of those ways about liberalism before, or even if you haven't, and you're just trying to figure out what in the world I'm talking about, this video is for you. Lately, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about modern liberalism. In July, I attended 2 conferences. One was literally called Liberalism for the 21st Century. And then a couple weeks later, I was a speaker at an event called Camp Abundance, which was an event for college students that are interested in the ideas of abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. This might surprise a lot of you to hear, since I've made videos that critique both Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. Thompson was actually one of the other speakers at this event, so a bit of a surreal moment for me. But anyway, at that event, my talk was about liberal ideology, which is a big part of both of those videos. I often critique my fellow liberals for ditching the moral vision that, in my view, is core to liberalism, which leaves us with a project that feels unambitious and unfulfilling. If liberalism should aim to be something beyond just technocratic management is a debate that seems to be really rising right now among commentators. Take this exchange as an example. Cassie Pritchard, a leftist with a pretty large following on Twitter, generated a lot of controversy when she said liberalism is so depleted, it's insane. No ambition, no new answers, no adjustments, just 1992 forever. A Clintonite infinity. We must imagine Sisyphus balancing the budget. So just set aside.
Like, I hate that I'm even going to say this. I could be sympathetic towards that if it was coming from like a Peter Thiel or JD Vance type, because those guys are like trying to imagine like a post-liberalism world, I guess, as cringe as their fucking ideas are. But how are you going to say shit like liberalism is out of good ideas and then go, we need to go back to some shit that they were talking about theorizing in like the 1800s that's never worked before? Like, okay, well, fine, liberalism is out of ideas. Fine. Like, what do you want to do? Oh, you want to go to like an old thing that literally sucks so hard, like it's never worked ever, and nobody likes it at all ever, and it's never worked. Like, I don't know, it's cringe.
If you agree with this critique or not for a moment. I think this critique has 2 parts, and I want to try and break it down. The first part is that there are obviously problems with society, and yet many liberals treat politics as an essentially solved problem requiring technocratic management more than big fundamental change. The second part of this critique is a bit deeper than that. Pritchard is also saying that this kind of politics also produces an unbearable feeling of pointlessness. No new horizons to chase, no more mountains to climb. It's all been done. This feels depressing. Kelsey Piper, writer at The Argument, the online liberal magazine, responds in a way that I think is fairly representative of how the liberal intellectual class feels about these kinds of arguments by saying, I think the fundamental disconnect here is that you want politics to solve man's search for meaning, and I want politics to deliver a safe, prosperous, free society in which everyone can go find meaning in something other than politics. As I often talk about on this channel, liberal intellectuals fundamentally do not think that the kinds of questions that Cassie Pritchard is raising in that critique ought to be part of politics. Here's another example of this mindset.
It is impossible for me as a religious person, I'm sorry, not to look at sort of progressivism right now and say, you need something else in the horizon besides saying we're going to be inclusive and we're going to get rich together with flying cars. You need to say, so that we can live in some specific way that we are supposed to live. What is that way, Ezra Klein? How then shall we live?
My friend, I am a liberal. I actually believe in creating a space for liberal individual flourishing of different kinds.
I'd actually go so far as to say that many liberal intellectuals even associate the suggestion that politics should be about more than technocratic policymaking with illiberalism or authoritarianism. Now, obviously, as a leftist, Pritchard is not the best messenger on this subject for liberals, and neither is Ross Douthat, who's making a critique of Ezra there from a religious perspective. But this kind of liberal malaise point is not the exclusive domain of socialists and conservatives. Francis Fukuyama, a man who has more liberal democratic bona fides than just about anyone, had this to say at the end of his original The End of History essay, which would later be expanded into his famous book. A quick note, the end of history in this essay means the end point of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of government. What it doesn't mean is things stop happening, as funny as the memes about this are. Anyway, here's what Fukuyama had to say about the end of history. The end of history will be a very sad time. The struggle for recognition, the willingness to risk one's life for a purely abstract goal, the worldwide ideological struggle that called forth daring, courage, imagination, and idealism will be replaced by economic calculation, the endless solving of technical problems, environmental concerns, and the satisfaction of sophisticated consumer demands. In the post-historical period, there will be neither art nor philosophy, just the perpetual caretaking of the Museum of Human History. Probably not as happy sounding as you might have expected the end of history to be. Anyway, this is all to say that what looks at first glance like a basically unimportant Twitter argument is actually striking at the heart of a long-standing critique of modern liberalism. But leaving philosophy world for a second, I think this critique is what a lot of normal people who aren't reading a ton of philosophy are intuitively grasping at when they complain about liberalism being boring,
Just as I don't think people are intuitively grasping at it. I think they're being fed this from social media feeds and everything, that everything is horrible and terrible and that we need some drastically, because I don't think in like the 90s or 2000s, people were like, we got to change our government system completely. The normal liberalism way of doing whatever. I don't think most people have an intuitive grasp on this at all. I think it comes heavily fed to us from our, whatever our media consumption is.
Ambitious and interested mostly in preserving a dying status quo. A lot of the modern liberal tendency to reject these kinds of critiques as basically irrelevant comes down to believing that liberalism as a philosophy just has not much to say about anything other.
I don't think it's necessarily irrelevant. I just don't think the average person is feeling this as much as some people like to pretend they are.
Than how to set your government up at a fairly basic institutional level. Matthew Iglesias, one of the biggest liberal commentators around today, published an article earlier this year called Liberalism and the Search for Meaning that describes this view fairly well. He describes the distinction that the philosopher John Rawls makes between comprehensive and political philosophies. A comprehensive philosophy is a philosophy that tries to answer questions about things like meaning, the good life, all that. The political philosophy of political liberalism takes as a given that we're not all going to agree on one comprehensive philosophy, on one vision of what a good life looks like, and tries to be neutral between different comprehensive philosophies.
What's up? How are you doing? Is my mic all good?
Yep.
All right. I had a couple questions actually similar to the video you're watching in regards to liberalism. I'm reading a book called Globalization is Discontents by Joseph E. Stiglitz, and he's like a kind of contemporary thinker in regards to like international political economy. And I guess my main question is, do you think the critique of the IMF stifling economic growth in the third world has any validity, or?
I would have to read like an actual econ paper on it, but the paper would have to explore more than just like the theory of big bad capitalist, takes advantage of poor small Africa boy.
Well, I think the argument Stiglitz lays out is that the difference between the World Bank and the IMF is that the IMF kind of pushes this like market fundamentalism in the sense that it wants to reduce inflation as much as possible, and it doesn't actually put any like planning into like building up like the infrastructure and like the economy of said states. It just really focuses on it really focused on reducing inflation, while the World Bank, as a institution that is not as powerful as the IMF, is also is trying to do those things which increases like the GDP. Like you said, GDP is actually a pretty good variable in determining economic growth and stuff. So it's like the World Bank is trying to put forward things um, infrastructure growth. It doesn't just focus on inflation. That's kind of the argument he makes. You think that's
Does the
you
IMF
think that
only
makes sense?
focus on inflation? Is that the IMF?
Well,
I didn't
that's
even
like
know that
something.
inflation had anything to do with the IMF at all. But I
Well,
might just be
when the
retarded.
IMF, when the IMF puts out these like packages in order to fix the macroeconomics of any given country in the third world, especially during Clinton's administration, they heavily focus on reducing inflation as one of their sticking points.
Like reducing inflation through like
Through
monetary
austerity.
policy or
Yeah,
reduce
through monetary. Yeah.
or through monetary policy.
hmm
Hold on, let me finish my sentence. Are they trying to do it
Yeah,
through
sorry.
monetary policy, or are they trying to do it through like a restructuring and a reimagining of a country's entire economic system?
Sorry, they're trying to transition away from kind of like the socialist economics that many of these countries have by restructuring the broader economy instead of. Sorry, I don't know why I agree to monetary.
Okay, yeah, because inflation can be a problem, but like in post-World War Germany, like inflation was a problem, but not really. It wasn't like inflation. It was caused by a whole bunch of other things. So if you wanted to quote unquote fix inflation there, you wouldn't just be fixing the monetary policy. It would be like a whole set of economic things you would have to do, right? So that's why I asked it.
Yeah.
So I guess what else? What is the issue then with the IMF, that it should have been trying to do something different, or that it ended up failing its mission, or what?
The issue with the IMF, Stiglitz lays out in his book, is that the IMF, in their pursuit of kind of liberalization and market liberalization, they heavily focus on reducing inflation and cutting spending. This is where the term like austerity comes in a lot during the book, and it kind of like it focuses really on reducing deficits and reducing inflation is kind of the main thing.
Okay, apparently I don't know anything about the IMF, because everything you're saying just sounds like government fiscal policy. I don't know how like an external thing would just come in and tell you to do.
Well, that's because the IMF gives out these economic packages in which they give a bunch of money, but it has a lot of like strings attached. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
they would partner with the World Bank to give out aid packages, and because of these they don't want all the aid just going to like the minister's Bugatti or something. They would put in strings, but as time went on and as the Soviet Union fell, they would
Well,
increasingly.
so then was
kind
it
of-
so should it? Well, okay, so that
Yeah,
makes
go
more
ahead.
sense, right? That obviously if they're lending money
Yeah.
to people, there's going to be strings attached. Should there be no strings attached, or is that like a mistake, or
That's not what kind of arguing, that's not what Stiglitz argues.
or there should have been
either.
different strings attached, or?
There should have been more like a more whole like a more focus on kind of like the increasing infrastructure within any given country is kind of the main point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess I would imagine. Yeah, you would want like so like if they had conditions for a country to receive support from the IMF, the conditions should have been structured in a way that would have been more beneficial, rather than the way they were structured ended up not benefiting countries as much as others would have.
Yeah, no, I'll give you an example. I guess I'm a little bit more biased because I'm Ethiopian. The Ethiopian example is that when Meles Zenawi kind of came out of the end of communism in Ethiopia, he went to institutions like the World Bank. He went to institutions like the IMF, and he essentially said that, well, we would appreciate the aid that you give us, but we're still trying to build hospitals, build infrastructure, build things that will lead to the betterment of the lives of our citizens and also increase GDP. While the IMF, when in negotiating with Meles Zenawi, the president of Ethiopia, they would very heavily insist on cutting things like that, cutting deficits, in order to meet the conditions for him to receive aid. Does that make sense? Am I making
Wait, then why
sense?
receive aid? Why not? Shouldn't the guy then just say like, no, I don't want it then, and we'll wait?
Well, that's kind of what he did, but it was paired with the fact that a lot of other financial institutions kind of did not treat Ethiopia favorably. They reduced their rating. I think it's called the credit rating for like for the state of Ethiopia. You know, like so, like it seems what Stiglitz lays out. It seems like when smaller countries go against the IMF, ones that are not as geopolitically important or economically kind of backwater, they would get like a lot of negative consequences for refusing the aid that the IMF would try to give them.
Wouldn't the understanding be that the reason why is because if they're not doing the things that the international community feels is important for them to be a stable country, people would be less likely to want to lend the money?
I mean that makes sense, but additionally, the IMF is different from the World Bank because the World Bank would have given the aid, and the World Bank did give aid to other countries, such as I think a good example is Botswana. They would give aid to many countries without the same strings attached as the IMF and without the same economic restructuring programs. And it actually worked really well for Botswana. Botswana is one of the few countries which are relatively economically prosperous. At least in the sub-Saharan Africa, it's relatively stable, has a good democracy.
Okay. Yeah, I guess. It sounds like you're describing some things, but I'm not really sure. I guess where I'm supposed to feel like the problem is. I guess is the confusing thing for me.
Let me try to pinpoint it down in a more concrete way. The IMF as an economic institution doesn't really factor in the eternal development of these countries, and obviously it's for a good reason. They don't want the people to default on their loans, obviously, and the money just to go nowhere. But they don't put enough emphasis on developing countries, and they just put emphasis on giving out loans, having those countries embrace austerity, and then receiving the money back in interest as well. I think.
Yeah, but it sounds to me like absent the IMF, these countries would all just be completely fucked, right? It's not like the IMF is like hurting these places. These are just places that are fucked, and then absent the IMF, they would just continue to be fucked, no? And then maybe the IMF could do something better, but it's not. But I guess the initial impression I had was it sounded like you were kind of saying like the IMF was like destroying these places.
Well, not necessarily destroying, but they weren't necessarily helping as the stated goal of the IMF.
Sure.
Like the stated goal of the IMF is kind of, at least after the end of communism and the end of the Soviet Union, the goal was to lift up the second and third world countries after the fall of the Soviet Union and transition towards liberalization. In reality, what the IMF did was the lack of like a holistic goal and the infrastructure development of the countries they led aid to. These countries kind of collapsed into various forms of like dictatorship or like civil war, because the argument Stiglitz lays out is because of the austerity implemented, many of the people revolted because there's not enough hospitals being built, a lot of farm subsidies for like farmers were going away.
Yeah, but you say because of the way the austerity was, but like absent the IMF's intervention, are you saying these countries would have grown and been fine, or would they have still been completely fucked?
I think they were still been completely fucked, but the IMF kind of didn't really fulfill its mission goals.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I can agree with that. Yeah. I think the IMF haven't they changed the way they've approached things pretty significantly over the past few decades? Because I feel like I heard these criticisms in the past, and there was like a change in how they would try to, I guess, assist countries or whatever. But I don't know how true that is. It's just something I've heard.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is like an older book, so perhaps the IMF has changed, but. I'm not. Let me just get this out of the way. I'm not trying to put forward like the commie arguments that are just like the IMF goes to like third world and destroys it. Like you said, the third world would probably still be in like a bad place, whether or not the IMF. But I'm saying as liberals, I feel like the reformation of the economic institutions that America spearheads should kind of be a priority.
Sure, but I feel like how old is the book?
It was released in late 1990s, I think. Or let me just Google it. It's not in the fucking book. 2002.
According to a 2002 study by Randall W. Stone, I'm just ripping from the wiki here, the academic literature on the IMF shows no consensus on the long-term effects of IMF programs on growth. Some researchers found that IMF loans could reduce or can reduce the chance of a future banking crisis, while other studies have found that they can increase the risk of political crises. I don't know. Did the IMF ever significantly change their approach to countries, or did they not? I feel like I've heard this before, but I'm not sure if I just haven't dug that deep into it. But okay.
Yeah. I guess that's it. Do you see any like kind of flaws? Do you think I'm just being too broad in this argument? Because like while I was reading this book, I was thinking to myself, I feel like some of these arguments kind of hold up, but I guess I have to do more of a deep dive into modern IMF policy, and also I don't want to kind of just give leeway to like the commie arguments that the IMF is just like maliciously destroying the third world for no reason.
I mean, I would be careful when reading anything. I don't think you should ever mentally structure it as like not given to the commie arguments. Like just because somebody's making an argument doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. So I mean, I would never try to like load it that way. I'm sure there are legitimate criticisms of any large international thing. The IMF not exempt from that. So, but I don't know enough about it to have like a super strong opinion. I'm not fighting you much on it. I just don't know enough about it. Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. All right, I guess that's all. Okay. Thank you.
I love you. Be careful.
Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Bye.
The way I see it, most prominent defenders of liberalism today are not defending liberalism as a comprehensive doctrine. They're defending political liberalism, which is sort of by definition unable to answer questions about meaning or purpose or the good life. So you can see why, when faced with a critique of liberalism that has to do with meaning or something else intangible like that, many liberals just kind of balk at the suggestion that politics has anything to do with this stuff. Liberalism wasn't always this limited, though. In the historical liberal tradition, you can find all sorts of examples of people talking about meaning and the good life. I think the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article on liberalism describes things accurately whenever it describes political liberalism as more austere than what came before. I would have a problem with people making a pragmatic argument about how a liberal political system is best able to accommodate a wide variety of lifestyles and belief systems in a world where diversity is a fact of life. I agree with this. The danger, though, is in reducing liberalism to a philosophy that has absolutely nothing to say about the issues defining American politics today. As Iglesias himself says in his article, how should the tax code work is just a really normal debate within the confines of liberal politics. The problem anyone really concerned with these issues will have is that at the moment, neither partisan coalition agrees that these issues, talking about stuff like the tax code here, belong at the forefront of public life. Instead, Republicans have devolved into a single-minded scapegoating of immigrants for all of life's problems, while Democrats argue among themselves about whether it's legitimate to talk about anything other than the need to cut billionaires down to size. I agree with Iglesias' analysis of the situation. Politics in America is about things other than the tax code right now. Here's Nobel laureate Darren Acemoglu, who describes how liberals got to this point pretty well on the economist Tyler Cowen's podcast.
It's the same with left liberalism. I think it became quite influential throughout much of the Western world and some of the emerging economies as well over the last 70, 80 years. But it did not use that establishment power just in the right way, creating its own weaknesses that made it much more vulnerable to outside attacks. And that's why I think we are now going back, because we are at a sort of an interregnum period in which ideas are battling again. So in some sense, it's just like the early 19th century where you had all these very different ideas and they were trying to get a toehold in the imagination of people.
I typically phrase things in a fairly similar way. I think the basic principles of liberal democracy looked for a time to be so accepted that we forgot that it was important to really believe in or have arguments for our core principles. We thought that all the action was in making the marginal policy advances because that's really where all the action was. There's no reason to spend time talking about the fundamentals like who can be an American when nobody's disputing who can be an American. But as Iglesias points out, and as the national conservatives so frequently remind us, we are just not lucky enough to have that kind of consensus on the fundamentals today. Faced with a reality where we're not just talking about the tax code, I think liberals have two options. The first option is to continue insisting that the proper scope of politics only includes things like messing with the tax code, and then try and convince everyone else to lower their horizons and just stop arguing about questions like what is an American and what is the good life. This is the version of liberalism that I think is well and truly out of steam. It's depleted. It's out of ideas. It has no answers to the day's most pressing political questions because it has decided that politics cannot or should not address those questions. The second option is for modern liberals to remember that they have an actual ideology with things to say about meaning, the good life, and who the government should be for. Beliefs that go beyond just pragmatism, efficiency, economic growth, or technocratic management. But what are those beliefs? In the past, I think liberals would have been able to answer this question pretty easily. Liberals believe in a society oriented towards, as Jefferson put it, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Or as the French put it, liberty, equality, and fraternity. One of the great projects of liberals since 1789 has been trying to find a way to capture the elegance of the French version in a way that doesn't sound so pretentious. Here's JFK making an attempt.
We had an interesting convention at Los Angeles, and we ended with a strong democratic platform, which we called the Rights of Man. The Republican platform has also been presented. I do not know its title, but it has been referred to as the power of positive thinking. It is, I believe, this faith in our fellow citizens, as individuals and as people, that lies at the heart of the liberal faith. For liberalism is not so much a party creed or a set of fixed platform promises, as it is an attitude of mind and heart, a faith in man's ability, through the experiences of his reason and judgment, to increase for himself and his fellow men the amount of justice and freedom and brotherhood which all human life deserves.
One of the big problems with modern technocratic liberalism is that it makes liberal ideas seem much more complicated than they really need to be in almost all cases. Everything has to be a careful balance of all these competing forces, and we need to be so careful whenever we're making big declarative statements. It actually does not have to be this complicated. When you're trying to communicate your most deeply held principles and ideals, what you want is clarity, not academic jargon. The greatest thing that the Declaration of Independence gave the liberal tradition was the phrase self-evident. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with certain unalienable rights. In other words, we actually aren't required to have a complicated discourse on this in almost any case. Any person with the capacity to use reason can simply look around and come to this conclusion. This is not satisfying for philosophers and academics and a lot of journalists, but it was more than good enough for the American revolutionaries to just say, look around, you are human, you are free, you are equal, and then talk about what this means for practical governance. With that being said, let's return to the original question. Is liberalism depleted? Is it out of ideas? Has it run its course? Now that we understand our fundamental principles, I think we can say no. Regardless of how we define these terms, I think we obviously live in a world where not all people are free, where people are not all equal, and we absolutely do not live in a world with any sort of sort of universal brotherhood. Now that we're talking about fundamental principles, we can actually engage with all those fundamental questions that Iglesias was a little bit frustrated that politics seem to be all about right now. I think this is very freeing. We can talk about the impacts that wealth inequality has on society, not because we're making some calculated, cynical concession to a demand for economic populism, but because our principles demand that we take this problem seriously. We can make an argument for defending birthright citizenship because it aligns with our principles. And maybe most importantly, we can defend liberal democracy as a fundamentally good thing, not just an unhappy settlement. You've probably heard this quote from Churchill before: democracy is the worst form of government except for all those other forms that have been tried. It's a great and catchy quote. I understand why people like it, but I actually kind of hate it now because of how I've seen it being used by some liberal commentators. When Matthew Iglesias or Derek Thompson say that liberalism is the worst idea except for all the others, I understand logically the point that's being made here. I do. I understand that this is part joke, part serious component of the broader pragmatic argument for why we should all accept living under a liberal democratic framework because it can best accommodate different perspectives. Even more than this, I understand that there's a culture in the liberal commentary space that prizes these kinds of practical seeming arguments above all others. I know all this, but I still just want to say stop. Freedom, equality, democracy, these fundamental principles, they're not just utilitarian. They're fundamentally correct. They allow us to run societies that aren't just economically efficient and relatively peaceful, but societies that are aligned with justice and human flourishing. I don't believe in a government where the people have a say because it's the most efficient. I believe in a government where the people have a say because when the people don't have a say, that's an illegitimate government. Let me show you one of the great modern articulations of liberalism as an ideology committed to high ideals, a speech by Robert F. Kennedy Sr. delivered to an audience of students in South Africa in 1966.
We must recognize the full human equality of all of our people before God, before the law, and in the councils of government. We must do
A little bit? He kind of looks like him, right?
this not because it is economically advantageous, although it is, not because the laws of God command it, although they do, not because people in other lands wish it so. We must do it for the single and fundamental reason that it is the right thing to do.
When you were in school, you might have been playing cool math games or something when your teacher was talking about modes of persuasion. Aristotle talked about ethos, an appeal to the credibility of the speaker, pathos, an appeal to emotions, and logos, an appeal to logic. The liberal commentary space is very focused on appearing reasonable, looking like the adults in the room. Arguments are not made based on appeals to values, they're made based on appeals to polling data. We don't talk about how a policy might make people feel. That's for children. We talk about the data, which is for adults. We don't talk about how our ideas can help people live better, more fulfilled, more meaningful lives. We criticize people for daring to point out that politics is and always has been, in addition to those pragmatic concerns, also about things like meaning, respect, and recognition. If there's one thing that you take from this video, I'd like it to be that there's absolutely nothing reasonable about ignoring 2/3 of an effective argument. And there is absolutely nothing rational about ignoring the essential truth that politics is about more than cold hard data. There's nothing at all reasonable about expecting people to believe in a system that argues for itself by saying, oh, well, we're the worst except for all the others. I think it's telling that Churchill himself delivered that worst except for all the others speech in 1947, not 1940. When your fundamental values are under threat, you have to really believe in them, fight for them on the beaches and the landing grounds, so on and so forth. Derek Thompson, Ezra Klein, and Mark Dunkelman had a fascinating conversation about if it would be desirable or feasible for the government to step in and create a 4-day work week in response to AI causing mass labor market disruption. Ezra talked about it in terms of freedom.
If we do end up in this world where AI is a labor replacing technology, which, to some degree it will be, should the goal be that, the 5-day work week isn't set in stone. Maybe it should be 4 days. Maybe it should be 3. Brink Lindsay in his sort of abundance adjacent new book, The Permanent Problem, is circling some of these ideas. But I'm curious, given your more historical perspective, what you think of that and what you think of time as a thing, leisure time, time that you have autonomy over as a long-term goal for abundance.
Derek talked about it in terms of equality.
I think we need to think about what kind of labor market policies we can begin to build to ensure that there isn't a displacement of workers, so that if this technology makes people more productive, it results in something that looks much more like a 4-day work week than the equivalent 20% of the economy just being shunted onto unemployment.
Mark talks about the American national character and how Americans might actually end up working more if such a thing were to happen.
In the moment of every new technological transformation, we have had some notion, some dream that maybe we could have less work and more leisure for the same income. And in most cases, it's part of the American DNA to use the extra time to do more work, right? I think, Keynes famously expected that we would be spending less time at work.
It'd be our 15-hour work week by now.
Right.
I really enjoyed that exchange because it kind of accidentally drifted into a serious discussion about the ways that liberal values demand that we dream of a better world. This isn't about me taking a position on the 4-day work week or any policy in particular. What I'm trying to demand here is just a little more romanticism in liberalism. I hope you all passionately debate the application of liberal principles to reality in unconventional or interesting ways in the comment section of this video. The more people that do things like this, the less depleted of energy and new ideas liberalism will feel. Let's shift gears for a second, though, and address more clearly the second part of the objection to liberalism from the beginning of this video. Not the part about if liberalism is out of ideas. Hopefully I've covered that enough, but the part about meaning. Take a look at this clip of Ezra Klein and Ross Douthat talking about how they feel like the Pope's AI encyclical intersects with modern politics and liberalism.
Pope Leo's AI encyclical, one of the things that struck me reading it was, without agreeing with his metaphysics, right? I am not a Catholic. My vision of the world and its cosmology is not Catholic. I found it to be a really beautiful and moving articulation of what I would otherwise describe as liberal values. all the way down to ways of practicing politics, approaches to pluralism, approaches to the human being.
I think there's a real desire for people who are willing to talk about things like fundamental human dignity, people as ends rather than means. That's liberal, but it's also a moral position. Do you remember what I said about political liberalism at the beginning? The modern defenders of this idea say that it is not the job of politics to answer questions about meaning, the good life, these kinds of controversial questions. In the past, I've called this kind of liberalism consensus liberalism, which adapts a term from John Rawls to emphasize just how important maintaining a cross-ideological consensus on the fundamentals of government is to this set. At core, there's a belief that this kind of politics produces the most stable foundation for a liberal political system. The stakes of politics have to be lowered so that people aren't using the government to oppress each other over different visions of the good life. The advocates of a purely political idea of liberalism see it as an existential threat to liberalism whenever someone says politics and meaning in the same sentence. I want to be clear, there's a really important truth to this argument, one that's informed by all the horrific cases you can imagine of someone trying to use the state to enforce their vision of the world on others. At the same time, though, no ideology can avoid entirely having commitments that aren't acceptable to everyone. No ideology can be entirely neutral between different conceptions of a good life. Now, we can all think of the obvious objections to an ideology that is truly neutral on what the good life is. What if I think a life of piracy would be my highest life goal? Whatever. But let's be more reasonable here for a minute and not just dismiss this out of hand. There's a section of Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution that says the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government. Pretty straightforward, right? If you're a state in this country, you're not allowed to set up a monarchy. You have to have a government that elects representatives. Nobody today has a problem with this. At the same time, though, this is also taking a very clear stance on what forms of government are acceptable and what forms of government are not acceptable. If you believe that a statewide monarchy would be the best form of state government, the Constitution says no, you will live in a republic. All forms of government other than republics are illegitimate. And that's fine with me. I do think that governments that aren't run on the basis of the consent of the governed are illegitimate. That's a thing that I believe. But saying this obviously implies some opinion on some moral questions that people might very well disagree on. Someone might say that the people are horrible and therefore don't deserve to have a say in government. I'm not bringing this up to be like, oh, everyone who disagrees with me must be secretly okay with tolerating dictatorships. I'm making this point because everyone is obviously okay with the liberal state making some moral claims and having some commitments that aren't totally neutral between different conceptions of the good. Admitting that we can't always be totally neutral on moral questions is actually just fine. We don't have to maintain some noble lie about it. It's an impossible standard to reach. There's a whole host of things that an ideology cannot be truly neutral on. For example, who is a citizen? In a political entity, you can't have multiple definitions of who is a citizen and who is not a citizen working simultaneously. You might complicate things by having different tiers of citizenships or different tiers of rights and obligations, or you might say that people in Texas have different rights and obligations than people in Oklahoma. But one person cannot simultaneously be a citizen and not a citizen. And the choices we make here inevitably involve making moral judgments. Does someone deserve to be a citizen if they're born here? Should we listen to the national conservatives, eliminate birthright citizenship, and count Americanness by the number of generations you can count your ancestors back in the United States? You can't have both of these at the same time. It's impossible. There's a really great video that the New York Times columnist Jamel Bouie put out a few weeks ago called "It's Time for American Liberals to Have a Little Backbone," where he makes a point very similar to this.
I'm very fond of Abraham Lincoln's House Divided speech, in large part because it is so much more hard-nosed than how I think we remember it in the present. Today, we think of the House Divided speech as being about how we all have to come together. But that's not what Lincoln was saying. A house divided will not stand. The nation cannot be half slave and half free. It will either become all of one thing or all of the other. Lincoln would say, we can't compromise. We can't do both things at once. Either we're going to be a slave country or we're going to be a free country. That's the choice. It was an ultimatum. It wasn't a paean to centrism.
Whenever the government is intersecting with people's lives, which is often, there's moral judgments occurring. If we are liberals committed to total neutrality between different comprehensive worldviews, can we prevent science teachers from teaching young Earth creationism alongside real science? I don't think that we should be teaching young Earth creationism in public school science class, but lots of people do. Sure, it's not reasonable for them to think this. You might try and limit things by saying that this kind of neutrality only applies to reasonable comprehensive doctrines, but they don't care about my definition of rationality. There's the old joke that the definition of a liberal is someone too broad-minded to take his own side in an argument. Sometimes I feel like the aggressively neutral liberal commentators take this a little too seriously. The same kind of thing applies to meaning. From my perspective, one of the key insights of liberalism is that a meaningful life, a good life, is necessarily freely chosen. This is because there's a lot of things that are good only if they're freely chosen. Working hard of your own free will is good. Being forced to work is awful. If you don't have freedom, there's a whole category of things that are good that you can't access. This framework is what allows liberals to have a coherent perspective on how politics should interact with meaning without becoming totalitarians. Let me explain with a more familiar concept. For a long time now, American liberals have been all right with the concept of positive freedom. That is freedom that isn't just limited to freedoms from government interference. Having the freedom to pursue education isn't worth much if there's no school within 100 miles of you, or it's too expensive for you to attend. So today, liberals rightly say that we are more free, not less free, if we fund public education. It's worth pointing out that even plenty of freedoms that old school, negative rights only liberals appreciate require government force to ensure. Property rights, not just commercial property, but your own personal property, requires the protection of someone if it's going to be real. Your right to a trial by jury is dependent on the government being able to make people show up for jury duty. Your right to a lawyer is dependent on the government taxing people to pay for a lawyer. Your right to vote is dependent on somebody delivering the ballots. We are fine doing all these things. We're not worried that this is the slippery slope to totalitarianism because we believe in principle principle that having the government provide education or healthcare or the right to a trial by jury enlarges people's freedom and makes society more equal. That's the principle that we're trying to get at by doing these things. When it comes to meaning, the liberal approach should be to recognize that yes, the meaningful and good life is necessarily freely chosen. The liberal state is never going to be ordering people to be cogs in the machine, but we don't have to pretend that we have no idea what makes for a good life. And we absolutely don't have to pretend that everything that people choose to do is equally good. The founding fathers talked all the time about virtue. Enlightenment era philosophers were big on the idea that people needed to have certain beliefs if a republic was going to succeed. Even from a strictly practical, preserving liberal democracy perspective, you should care about ensuring that enough people in a society believe in liberal democracy. If someone has an addiction and their life is clearly suffering because of that fact, what they need is help, not a solemn, well, that's what they chose to do. In practice, there is no difference between this perspective and the most cold-hearted caricature of a conservative take that people to do. In practice, there is no difference between this perspective and the most cold-hearted caricature of a
I thought it said caricature.
Conservative take that people suffering always deserve it. Just like we talked about earlier, people pursuing meaningful lives has always been part of politics. Ignoring this fact will not change it. If people are saying that they don't feel meaning in their lives, if they're saying that they feel disrespected or ignored by society, liberals have to engage with that, or somebody else will. The real slippery slope to authoritarianism is believing that liberals have the luxury of excusing themselves from this part of politics. If people do not feel like they're getting meaning out of a liberal society, they will destroy that society. I want to address one more aspect of the meaning critique before I wrap this up. Returning to the Fukuyama quote from the beginning, is a liberal society destined to make us feel like the struggle for recognition, the willingness to risk one's life for a purely abstract goal, the worldwide ideological struggle that called forth daring, courage, imagination, and idealism, has been replaced by economic calculation, the endless solving of technical problems, environmental concerns, and the satisfaction of sophisticated consumer demands? I can't answer this question definitively. I don't think anyone can. I can tell you what I see, and what I do unfortunately see is a lack of courage, imagination, and idealism among today's leading American liberals, which can give people the feeling that liberalism is an ideology of blinking last men. This is a serious problem. But I also still see the struggle for freedom and recognition happening around the world. In my own country, I see one theater and a new worldwide ideological struggle. There's plenty of meaning and heart there for an ideology if we can just embrace the fact that we live in a time that demands ideals, courage, and creativity as much as it demands data. I hope you agree, and let me leave you with this.
There is a Chinese curse which says, may he live in interesting times. Like it or not, we live in interesting times. They are times of danger and uncertainty, but they are also the most creative of any time in the history of mankind. And everyone here will ultimately be judged, will ultimately judge himself on the effort he has contributed to building a new world society and the extent to which his ideals and goals have shaped that effort.
Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like the video, comment, subscribe to the channel, hype the video. I don't know exactly what
the video.
Yeah, I am. What did you think of the video? I think Ryan Geddie is on a big thing where I kind of agreed with him a year ago that I think for the concept of liberalism, we probably need some kind of like cultural ideas to go along with it, and that it's a little bit empty, and that we just, because it's like the default state of affairs, we don't really think much about what it means to be like a liberal. We haven't really defended any of the core ideas related to liberalism in a long time, so people just kind of like take it for granted. But another thing, I think I'm probably more with the idea now that sometimes I just think that people are looking to get too much from certain things that just aren't meant to deliver those things, but like they could if you really wanted it to. I wish I could think of analogies that were better than programmer ones, considering I don't program, but like there sometimes you, or I guess like for tools in general. No, well, this isn't a program, it's just tools in general. Like you can have a tool that could do a whole bunch of things, but like sometimes there's a better tool for a particular job. You can use like a screwdriver. If you turn it around and just use the handle, you can use it as a hammer, I guess. Like you can. And depending on the scale of projects you work on, like it's okay for like stuff in your house, but it's like it's not a hammer. And I don't know, sometimes I feel like people are looking to political ideologies to do so much more than what they were ever meant to do. But I guess the problem is that like your socialists and your DSA types and then your weirdo fascist types and all these people, I guess, are promising you the world and claiming that they can do everything with their political ideology and it'll provide meaning and everything else. So you have to compete with that, I guess. I think the loss of social spaces and religion is leading people to look at liberalism to give it more. Yeah, I don't know about religion, but the social spaces thing for sure. I do think that that's the lack of like hanging out with people in real life. But it's also hard for me to know how much this impacts, I guess, like people in school now, because it's not like I'm in school to see. But like even I would have considered myself extremely nerdy growing up. But like I went to friends' houses, like parties and stuff on Fridays and Saturdays. Like you had to, of course you did. I don't know if that's like as true anymore or not. I'm not sure. Do you have a solution for the embed drama?
Me?
Yeah, you. Oh my god.
I was told not to talk about the embed drama by your mods anymore because they got mad at me and they said they had a solution and that you were going to weigh in on it. So did they just lie?
Oh, well, no, we're talking about it. But I'm just curious, what would your solution be?
Oh, let me think. I mean, Darius for sure. He's fine.
Wait, for sure what? Or wait. Oh.
He can interact with DGG in my mind.
While streaming.
I would say so. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. All right.
He's been around for fucking ever. I mean, I think he's pretty good. Parsec does work for DGG. He does like the emote shit. So I would think that that's okay.
Hi, what's up?
Hello, Anna.
Hello. I have a question about the video you just watched. I didn't see the whole thing, but just a little bit. I actually kind of like listening to it. You know, I understand what he means, and I also sort of agree with it because I have I guess you could say we have the more romanticized version of this in practice working. So I can understand what he means because people truly get like way more excited and invested in a thing when there's a lot of feelings involved, right? And when there's a lot of passion involved. But I just don't understand why his answer to this is populism.
Well, I mean, like, he kind of has. Have you ever talked to him about it?
No, I never spoke to him at all. I don't know if he knows I exist. I'm just like questioning. Because it's not only just his answer, it's a lot of people's answer. So like in a broader aspect, right? A lot of people, liberals seem to be thinking, oh, so we have this like absolute, the lack of passion, the lack of interest in people in the West, right? For fighting for democracy, liberalism, that all is assumed as like status quo, not excited. Like, you know, it's there's nothing to be excited about, so people don't get energized. So the answer then is... populism.
I mean, I would say you should talk to him about it because our conversation is going to be like, I mean, I think I probably fully agree with you. He has a way of defining populism in a way that I just don't see it that way. So, I mean, like,
well,
that's
that was Kent's right. I watched that. Yeah, I watched their conversation, part of their conversation with him and Lonerbox about populism. And like, I couldn't watch 3 hours of this fucking let's define the term shit. So yeah, I'm just, it's too autistic, dude. I can't. I'm not a dude bro enough for this. But it. Oh shit! Sorry. I had a video play for some reason. Anyway, point is that it's just that I understand where he's going with this, but I just wonder what is the. Obviously, he wants some sort of solution for this to fight, MAGA, which is right-wing populism. So like I don't know, fight fire with fire or some shit. I don't know. But like, I just wonder, like, what is your solution though? Because you are like, yeah, that's not like what we want to do. But then you're like, people just want too much from liberalism. And like, how does that help us energize people?
Well, I think the issue, I mean, I don't have anything good to say on this. My thing is, I think that there are certain issues that are echoing in your goddamn mic and it's driving me crazy. Hello?
In my mic?
Yeah, I hear myself.
We can hear ourselves.
Oh, shit.
Is there like a headphone or echo cancellation thing you can turn on? Would help.
Let's try this. Does this work?
Test.
Yeah, you sound a little weird, but that's okay. Hello? Yeah, well, it works fine.
The fuck is happening, dude?
No, you're good. No, wait. Hello?
Yeah, it's now that I hear you very poorly now.
Oh, you can't hear me? Oh, well.
Yeah, let me call again.
Okay. Got him. Easy. Bander from Discord. Hello?
Hello?
Hi.
How is this?
Sounds okay? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. I think that people are kind of like looking for things right now that are like in line with their kind of fun political projects or ideas. And that's the thing that concerns them the most. And I feel like some of the big issues that we have right now in the United States are things that just don't map cleanly onto a certain side politically. So people just aren't as interested in addressing them. So like one thing I would say is that people kind of take it for granted that the internet has like significantly changed the way we navigate the world. And at some point we probably need to like take a step back and maybe approach how we navigate life with the internet existing now. But that's just not like, it impacts everybody in different ways, and there's not like a nice, like easy, like political win answer from there. Like that's not like a clear like right or left problem. So I think that it makes it so that a lot of people don't, I guess, want to deal with it as much. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's just that it doesn't really help us all. You, I guess, not me. I'm not. I have a different war, but it doesn't help you in fending off people from the fucking populism, though. Because
no,
like,
I mean I agree,
it's
but then it feels like the only thing you can do is like wait for it to fail. Like none of the shit that people want from a populist regime ever comes from a populist regime. And unfortunately, I was hoping after our right-wing populist regime that the country would be like, okay, well, we need to have like real political conversations again and go back to having like real understandings of what we need to do with our country. But it seems like now we're getting actually we're just going to do left-wing populism now, which is fucking annoying.
Yeah, it seems so. Yeah. I was just hoping the same. Like I was hoping, like, with the failure of MAGA, people will just sort of start to appreciate the status quo and try to sort of return to it. But it's not happening. Sad news. And I'm just like curious, how do you? Because like if you were talking with someone like, for example, Ryan, right? And he is talking to you about this whole, we need this like energy, we need to fight for the greater things, for the emotional things, for the things that matter, for the things that give people purpose and meaning and blah, 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 and all of that. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, well, yeah, but like my answer is just like, liberalism can't give you meaning.
Well, like, I mean, I think the issue is that like a lot of the meaning that we got from liberalism now is kind of like baked in. So like it's hard to take it seriously when people tell you about anything related to it. So like, don't you think it's great that women can vote or that we got like civil rights for black people? Like these things are not super contentious issues at the moment. Now, who knows? Maybe we'll start to slide back on those and then liberals can fight for it.
How do you energize people like that? People who are like a little bit spoiled, no offense, by the lives living in that. In what democracy, liberalism, and all of that gives you. Because if you like talk about people like that, things like that with people who don't have those things, they get hella excited about them because obviously they want them, right? Mm-hmm. But it's like with European Union, the people who fucking love that shit the most are people who are not in it,
Wait for the
Georgia,
what?
Ukraine. People who love European Union the most are not in it, Ukraine, Georgia, shit like that. Everyone who
okay. Yeah.
there is people who are not there, and it's similarly to liberalism in that regard. Like people who don't have the things that you have, for example, in the United States, other people who like fight for that, dying for that. But like you already have those things, and now that those things are getting demolished step by step, and nobody's in a panic mood at all, it seems. And the solution is just equally cringe from the other end. So it's just, I don't know, it just puts me in proper depresso. I'm just trying to find someone who can, pick out a solution that isn't left-wing populism, and there is nobody, it seems.
Yeah.
And your solution is like, well, fuck it, it's gonna fail and pass, and maybe then people will.
I mean, like, I guess, like, more broadly, ideally, you would have, like, better conversations in media that could head off, like, the necessity for a massive collapse and failure first, but it seems like nobody is willing to do that. Like, I think that if you put a bunch of ordinary human beings in front of, like a left-wing populist, and they had to answer real questions from an interviewer, I think that a lot of people's ideas about left-wing populism would immediately be dispelled. But because of our social medias now, and because of how huge our media...
It's not asking questions, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but more importantly than that, it's you don't have to, right? Because of how ubiquitous all the online stuff is, and the fact that I can, inundate you with media that's favorable to me, and I never have to actually go into an adversarial environment whatsoever, that I have the luxury of never having to defend any of my actual beliefs. And I think in an environment like that, you would expect people to just feed you bullshit because there's no downside for doing so. So then I don't know how you're supposed to counter, other than, because I guess like in my mind, if you join like the left-wing populist ideas, all you're going to do is run into, in my opinion, the same trap that they're running into now, which is you are a populist, you make populist bids for governance, and then as soon as you get into office, literally nothing fucking works because populists can never fucking get anything done ever, and then you're just like back at square one, and now people are just mad looking for the next populist, or you grow up and you like go back to real politics, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, problem though is that I don't hear that discussed as much, is that although, yeah, I do agree, obviously, that they build themselves upon making extraordinary promises, but the biggest issue is that they whole idea, right, is basically pits the common people against the corrupt elite, against the establishment, right? Mm-hmm. And the whole frame of it is is based on division. And the politicians who are populists, they just put themselves as ordinary citizens. As like, I'm one of them, or one of you fighting against
every
the...
populist leader is
you know,
always somehow one of you, but it's because they found a way to identify their group as being like, they're part of the group. This is why the left-wing populism is so popular on the left right now. It's because it finally gives white people who are growing up in like really wealthy families a way back in to feeling politically relevant again, because now they're part of the working class, even if they're like ultra wealthy and everything. It doesn't matter because
that's
they're not
so strange.
capitalized.
I hear that so much. It's very like Soviet coded, obviously, but it's just that the people back in the day, it's a different thing, obviously, but people who then become the vanguard party, right? They were also like, we are the proletariat, and you're like, no, you're fucking rich, educated, abroad fuck. Okay, you're not the fucking peasant. Stop the cosplay. But that cosplay was effective back then, and it is effective today. It's just a different sort of, cosplay, because it's a different time, obviously, right?
Yeah.
And but ultimately, I just don't understand, like, for people like Ryan, how can you build... Oh, hey.
Speak of the devil.
Hello. Hello.
That's scary. Hello. He appeared.
Well, you think it's scary. It is horrifying, let me tell you, to be scrolling on my YouTube app and seeing my name on a stream title surrounded by red sirens. That is horrifying. That is a scary thing to see.
Okay, solid. Yeah, I didn't know it was that. That's Steven's fault though, and I'm not.
Wait, did I do it? Oh, because he changes my stream title. Oh, you're right. Oh, good. I hope you shouldn't be. You should be worried.
I have no control. Okay. Well, hello. Do you want to say something?
Well, I haven't heard anything that you've said for the last like 2 minutes, but sorry, I'm not super familiar with you and like what your name in the Discord is Ukrainian Ana. You're from Ukraine?
Yeah.
Good. Nice.
No, sorry. I was curious about your background. Like, what do you do in this space?
Yeah. I am I'm weird. Weird factor is that I'm on the stream with Steven right now. That's the weird factor. I am volunteer from Ukraine. I'm Ukrainian from Eastern Ukraine, city called Kharkiv. It's an air raid right now, and I have nothing better to do than to open a stream. So that's it. Yeah, and I just comment. I also speak with like a bunch of Westerners about Ukraine. Yeah. Like I'm like a spokesperson a little bit, I guess you could say.
Yes.
That's it.
I'd like to do more content about international stuff one of these days. So it's very interesting to hear people's perspective on that. Anyway, I'm curious. What did you think about the video? I missed the last like couple minutes, so I haven't heard everything.
I didn't watch the entire thing. I probably will because I'm interested in it a little later. I just caught the last part Steven was watching, and so I will watch it, and then my opinion would be, I guess, more grounded in everything you said. But from what I heard from you and also from this video, and I also watched part of the video where you talked about populism with other box, I think, and someone else was there, I think.
Yes, with Soy Pill and Reason Rift were the other participants.
Yeah, Reason and Soy,
hosted by the wonderful Ring Master.
So I was like mad about that video, and basically my whole thing is I understand, I agree with your idea about the fact that nobody finds liberalism exciting or interesting, or because that's completely the different thing where I'm from. And here, like, democracy, liberalism is like, yes, the shit, worth dying for, thing, everyone. So I agree that the lack of that passion is screwing you over. And I talked with Steven a lot about it, that I feel like people, think about it as basically the status quo that doesn't really give anything. Like, there's no ideology to it. There's no morality to it. There's no anything. So with all of that, I agree. We don't have to talk about that.
Yeah.
But point is, though, I just don't understand why the answer so many liberals in the West, especially in America, seem to be thinking that populism is the answer to it.
Well,
or like left.
You saw the debate. You saw the debate that I had with Loner and Reason, right? So I imagine. Yeah, it was a real marathon. I imagine whenever I go into these conversations, I find that usually the disagreement isn't with what I'm actually asking for more of, it is usually with the definition of populism. And so, maybe I just shouldn't have called the video. I mean, obviously, I'm courting a little bit of controversy, calling it that, and talking about populism in that way.
Oh,
but,
if you want the best definition of populism, by the way, I have it for you. I'll send it to you.
No. They talked about it 3 hours about the goddamn definition. Let's not do that. No.
I find
I've figured it out.
That's all right. Okay, go, Ryan. What do you got?
Let me pull this up. How do you feel about the definition of populism being something like an anti-elitist movement that claims that they or their group represent the people, and their political competitors are an immoral or corrupt elite? I mean, yeah, that's pretty close to what I say in the video.
Boom.
So yeah, I think that's pretty good. But the problem that I often run into whenever I'm talking about this is whenever people have a much thicker definition of populism that includes things specifically like, just like things that are obviously bad. But if you're talking about populism in
what you said with your definition is already bad, though. Is the thing.
I don't. If that's an accurate description of reality, I think that's perfectly fine. If it's an accurate description of reality to say that there's a corrupt elite that's oppressing common people, I think that's a perfectly fine way to talk about politics.
So this is like the point that gets me mad, basically. So we can talk about that, and if you want. Point is that the thing about this is that populism is always built upon division. So there are the pure people, so the people who are fighting against the corrupt, self-serving elites, right? And there are elites. And thing is that in itself is a message that is entirely built upon anti-establishment and all government people. That's why you get there. All of them, are not serving. They're all, how the leftists say these days in America, the fucking class that Cenk says that all the time, the donor class, the consultants, whatever the hell you want to call that, right? It's all them. And then there's this us, and then there's them. So my question in that, the biggest problem right now, as I see it from the very much like far away, right? I think it's like the absolute lack of trust and faith and belief in anything government related. So anything official, anything, news, whatever it is, journalism, everything is the same. Both parties are the same. Everyone is corrupt. This is the result of the populist brain rot. Because in reality, the Democrats are not anywhere near same to Republicans. So how more of that helps is my question.
I think maybe I just have like a different perspective on like the ability of political communicators to like choose what people care about. So like obviously there is a serious degree that people that are talking about politics, the media, can influence what people care about. And influence the way that they're thinking about politics. And it's a feedback loop, right? But I think whenever I hear people say things like what you're saying, I just think, what is actionable there? Like, what are we trying to do? Like what would you suggest that like politicians do or that political commentators do to like change that? Because the way that I see it, we are in kind of a populist moment, whether or not we want to be or not. And so we kind of have to live in the world as it is, not wish that it was different. And so I agree with you. It's very frustrating that we're in a moment where people, care about things other than just like, the data or whatever else. I agree that can be very frustrating, especially for a lot of liberals who were politically formed in an era where that felt like what politics was more. But I think that is just not the era we're in now, and we kind of have to speak to the concerns that people have, or we're really not relevant to modern politics.
So first thing I would say is that it's not up to me. Like I'm not American, so I can't really.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're a political commentator. That's
But
class is what I'm talking about here, like the class of
like,
political.
Okay, wait, real quick.
But
Can I take a stab at this? Okay, I'm curious for Ryan what you're saying. Okay, so this is my I'm kind of building off of what Anna says, but one of the reasons why I view populism as being fundamentally bad is because I feel like what populism does is it casts politics as like an essential us versus them game where there is an obvious good side and an obvious bad side, such that it necessitates the total shutdown of any sort of back and forth political discussion, and everything changes over only into political tactics because you found a way to cast whatever you have said your political opposition is as being wholly bad. It's not that you have disagreements on policy or anything anymore, but you found a way to cast them as just being evil people who are only in it for themselves. And then on your side, because what you're fighting, you're not just fighting people with political disagreements anymore, or even people with political disagreements that you can't divide, or that you can't like overcome. You're fighting actual evil people who are trying to destroy you. Now it necessitates basically the utilization of
so maybe
any
this is
tactic on
just
their
the
side.
difference.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
That I think is a fairly accurate description of the Trump administration and a lot of the people around the Trump administration.
Sure, I would say this 100%. I would say this 100% maps on to the DSA as well. Like if it maps onto MAGA, it absolutely maps onto the DSA.
I mean, maybe so.
No, maybe absolutely. If we disagree on this, I think we
who are
disagree
you
on
talking about whenever you say the DSA?
The official DSA party platform that wants to like abolish the Senate, that views capital as being evil. Like if you're viewing capital as evil,
I agree that the national leadership of the DSA is the kind of people that you're talking about. Yeah,
sure.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think that whenever people talk about the DSA, though, I think it's important to differentiate between, I think, whenever you see like a poll that says like 60% of Democrats have a positive opinion on the DSA, those kind of people versus like the Maoist caucus in the DSA National Political Committee or something.
Sure, but I think the obfuscation is part of the strategy, unfortunately. The goal is to have the terms being...
I think this is why I think it's so important for people to be able to talk about values and stuff, because if you're unable to talk about values, you're not going to be able to explain very well why those people are bad, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily disagree. Yeah,
you're just going to see them as like further left in a normal way. Like you're not going to be able to explain what's so bad about like Marxism, Leninism, unless you have a good grounding in like your own values.
True.
Wait,
I don't necessarily.
Populism be de facto bad?
Sure. Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying, but the only issue is, as a result of like populist rhetoric, that conversation that's foregone. Like it doesn't matter. Like the obvious answer is that there are the people, and then there are the corrupt evil elites. Why would we even have a conversation about Marxism or socialism or whatever else? We already know the other guys are the bad guys. This is why they never have to justify any of their.
I think this is because liberals have been so unwilling to engage in narrative making for so long. I think this is I think part of the reason why you see those kinds of more harmful narratives dominate is because for the longest time liberals have thought that that's just not like an appropriate thing to do in politics. And so of course the populist narratives that are around right now are going to be less amenable to liberal democracy.
Sure, but why the answer to this is more fire? I just don't understand that bit. Like you're fighting fire with fire. Like
because if people are saying if whatever percentage of the people believe that part of the problem with American politics right now is corruption, is elites, is whatever, you can't just lecture them about how they're wrong. That's not a very effective strategy.
Sure, but I mean, like, yeah, but if they are wrong, then that's.
Well, I don't think that they're wrong.
They are. Wait. This is like, hold on. This is my huge issue with the way that you frame populism. Okay, we do not have a corruption problem with the elites right now. We have a corruption problem with a very particular group of people. There are tons of if every single billionaire right now was transformed into Bill Gates, do you think that our political system would look even remotely similar right now to what it is? The Peter Thiels.
No, of course not. But if we're going on the definition of populism, that, and let me just say, because we're about to get into that kind of boring sort of definition of populism conversation. But if I'm understanding populism as anything remotely similar to the definition that Mr. Mouton sent here about a movement that claims to represent the people against like a political elite, I think there's absolutely no reason why you wouldn't call complaining about the corruption between the Trump administration and business elites and all the people around the Trump administration populist. I mean, I think that very clearly maps onto that definition.
Because definitionally, hold on, wait, quick. Definitionally, populism does not map on ever to a specific group of people. It identifies a set, and the set is the enemy. I think that's the issue. And I think that if we wanted to run this down, this is reflected every single part of the populist messaging. The issue is not with certain types of data centers that are infringing on community rights. It's all data centers. The issue is not that some people are exploiting their wealth in order to buy, media companies. It's all billionaires. The issue is
I just don't think it's true that populism has to be vague. And I think this gets really obvious whenever we think about historical examples of populism that very obviously targeted specific people or specific groups of people. I often talk about the American Revolution. The Declaration of Independence was addressed to one person in particular. That was not a generalized thing.
But we don't need to argue about that. But the point is that it frames society by definition as a division between ordinary citizens and establishment. And the establishment in that situation is evil. It's self-serving, it's corrupt, and the people who claim to be the populists who are with the people, they embody the will of the people with that fight against those corrupt. But it's a very amorphous. It's all of them. That's why you hear, for example, when DSA people speak, right? They don't speak about just Trump. They don't speak about just his administration, which is corrupt. And that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong with pointing out the truth that they are corrupt and they are self-serving and they are cons, right? So that's all true. But thing is, that's not what DSA is doing. What they're doing is talking about all of them.
Right. But the reason they're doing that is because they're ideologically committed to socialism. They believe that they are fighting for the interests of the proletariat.
Of the people, yeah.
Right.
Yes.
I don't think that that's the only way that populism can be, or the only way that populism has functioned historically.
Well, that's how. Again, I will say that we define things quite differently. I sometimes, just don't understand why you define things as not you personally, but just, Americans or Westerners have their own goddamn definitions. So arguing about definitions isn't fun for me, but it's just that it's happening. What I'm saying that, it is happening when you listen to
we don't disagree on that. We don't disagree on that.
So I guess a question I guess I would have. So you brought up the revolution, right? The American Revolution, right? This was a revolution against a particular monarch with a particularized set of grievances that called for a particular set of actions. So I feel to say that the American Revolution was populist, it doesn't feel the same as today when it's not certain companies.
No, it doesn't feel the same as today. I think that's one of the reasons why we should try a little harder.
Well, sure, but what I'm saying is that let me be more specific. I don't think I would call that populism in any way, size, shape, or form. You can just you can be pro-democracy or pro-republic and anti-monarch. I don't think that makes you a populist. That just makes
you think the American Revolution wasn't a populist movement?
I don't think with any understanding that I have the word populist, not really, because otherwise it sounds like we were just saying.
I think that you're defining populism in a way that is so parochial then that it ceases to be of really any practice.
Well, sure. Wait. I'm sorry. Hold on. Let me just run this down. Sorry. Okay. I feel like that you're defining populist in a way though that is so reductive. It's necessarily true of literally every single revolution ever. Would you say that Lenin and Trotsky?
No.
Well, wait. Okay. So for Lenin and Trotsky or whatever, for the Russian Empire, when they overthrew the czars, was that a populist uprising?
Well, they didn't. Well, the timeline's a little off there, but yeah, I think that the Bolsheviks were. Yeah, they were a populist movement. Yeah.
Is there any type of revolution that's not a populist movement?
It was though. I agree with Ryan on that one. That was popular.
Sure. But hold on. Are there any kinds of uprisings that aren't populist uprisings? Because it feels like by the definition of what you're saying, you're basically saying anytime there's enough people to enact a certain political change or to enact some kind of violent revolution, it's always a populist thing.
No. I mean, there's most revolutions in the world have not been popular revolutions. They've been something more akin to a palace coup And
Okay,
those things are
so
not
when you say
populist.
when you say popular, then are you saying that anything that has like broad support of the people is populist?
No, I
it's
would
not.
say that populist is pretty similar to the definition that Mr. Mooten provided about being a movement that
Against the corrupt elite,
aims
yes.
to represent the
important
common
bit.
people against the corrupt elite. Yeah,
Well,
I would say that that's the defining trait of populism.
I think that the problem is that when we're looking at that definition, we're saying like a corrupt elite, but like populists, from my understanding and then from my real world engagement with them, populists do not talk about like a particular corrupt elite. The elite class is always a lowercase e, very, 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 very broadly defined. Always, it is literally the
common
noun
class
and the
is
adjective itself. That's it. Like the elite is everybody. And
I think that I
It's
just
who they brand as the elite as well.
Sure, but
I
it'll
think
be
I
them.
would just look. I think I can look at history and I can see examples of when that wasn't the case. Now, I will say, just to sort of shift gears a little bit, because again, I think that when it comes down to brass tacks, I don't think that there's actually much difference in like what I'm practically recommending to what a lot of people like. I don't think there's too much disagreement there. What I think that the problem is the definition, and that's fine. I don't really care whether or not we call it populism.
Well, here, wait.
or not.
Well, let's hold on. I want to tease this out a little bit more because there might be conceptually some kind of difference here that I think is important and worth going through. I think when I'm saying there's like a difference between like an elite versus the elite. Like I feel like sometimes you're retreating to this concept of like.
I understand what you're saying.
Okay,
I
sure.
Don't
Well,
think
just real quick,
that's a defining characteristic of populism.
Sure. Okay, and maybe not. But every time you defend that concept, you're saying like historically. Can you give me a single example of MAGA or DSA right now that are engaged in what you claim historically populism has ever been about? Because I can't think of all of it is overly broad.
I'm not trying to do apologia for MAGA. Or
No.
the
I'm not
DSA.
saying you're doing apologia. I'm just trying to say
liberals
like
to be better.
Sure. Well, but when you say to be populist, it sounds like you're saying in the way that populism is just not understood at all right now. That's what I'm trying to understand. So I'm not claiming you're doing apology or anything. I'm just curious, like if you look at the way that any populist movement today is operating, are any of them focusing on like a particular thing, or because it always feels like a very, very, very broad.
I think that there's a lot. I think that there's a lot of great politicians in the Democratic Party who have done a good job of trying to capture some of this energy and make it more specific. So the example that I gave in my populism, in my video on populism, is Ossoff. I think he does a great job at capturing some of this energy, talking about sort of the Trump administration as a corrupt elite, but not just the Trump administration, also some of the people that surround the Trump administration. I think Tallarico does this to an extent. I think there's a rising tide of some of this among some of the more successful Democratic politicians, and I think
but
that's
then
a
I
good
would,
thing.
but then I feel like I would.
But
push
no,
you
I
here.
wouldn't say that MAGA or the DSA.
Well,
does
I would
this.
just say, I would say on Ossoff's rhetoric here, I would just push you and say that like,
Yeah.
it's populist then for me to point out that the Trump administration is like clearly and obviously corrupt?
I think that is a kind of populism. Yeah, to talk about the Trump administration as representing a corrupt elite that's robbing the people. I think.
Well,
that's
wait.
clearly
Well, you're using
an
a different.
example
Hold on,
of
wait. That's a
populism.
different. When you say representing, I mean the Trump admin is corrupt. Like there is no.
Yeah.
They just are, right? But when you say representing a corrupt elite, you've made it. I think that it's a small word you've added, but I think it makes a huge difference in what we're talking about because a lot of people would say who identify as populists would say, yeah, well, Trump is that's every rich person in the United States. That's every politician. Period. He does represent all of them, and that's my populist.
Ossoff doesn't just talk about the Trump administration. He does talk about some of the people that surround the Trump administration, and I think some of the other politicians that I would point to as good examples of this also talk about like the corrupt dealings with Trump and the business community. So I do think represent is an accurate word there. They don't just talk about the Trump administration.
I guess when I think of represent, I'm thinking of like this person is like metaphorically a stand-in for an entire noun, like an entire.
Well, maybe I shouldn't have used that word, but do you see what I'm getting at here, or is it totally unclear?
Well, I think I see what you're getting at, but the issue is if that's not the word you would use, then because Yeah, Trump
Well,
doesn't have to
clearly I
represent.
shouldn't have used the word if it's
sure.
not if it's
well,
not.
But
doing
yeah,
a
but I
good
can't tell if
job
there's.
of
That's why I'm trying to. I don't know if there's like
communicating.
a conceptual difference between what we're understanding here, or if it is literally just like some kind
I
of
really
like jargon
don't. I
semantics
really
thing.
don't think so. I think that the major problem that a lot of people have is just that they define populism in a way that I do not. But I'm not super attached to the idea of using the word populism.
Ryan,
Like, I'm not super attached to it.
the problem I personally have is that when you speak about this, it always sounds like you're talking. It's pointing out the corruption of someone who is legitimately could be perceived as elite, which would, obviously Trump would be, is populism.
Yeah.
So every time, and it's just not it. It's not it. It's just I don't know. We're gonna fight about the definition again, but that's like the problem I have with it. And I think reality in America right now shows that that's not it. Because
I
that's
think
not.
if we're going by the definition that I really don't want to keep doing this.
Sure.
I think it's super boring.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Yeah, I also don't want to fucking talk about 3 hours about definitions. But I have one
I think that there's great examples of Democratic politicians doing things that I would call populist. You don't have to call them populist. I would call them populist. I think it's important. I think it's important for people to kind of
brought up,
have-
right? As an example. Yeah.
Sorry, I missed the first part of what you said there.
Ossoff is the guy you brought up as a good example, right? Of someone who you. I heard some stuff from him, but it's just that does he ever? I obviously I don't watch your every politician, okay? But does he ever say something like, what would be the example? The people are tired of the corrupt elites. We have to put an end to this. And, have the government that represents the people. Does he do those kind of speeches at all?
I mean,
or does he speak Trump and the corruption of his particular administration? That is true.
Well,
does he say that?
I think the way that I would describe Ossoff and his sort of style is he talks about the Trump administration for sure. And I think it's correct and a good strategy to I don't understand the idea that populism has to be a vague thing. So, I just sort of want to point out that I sort of disagree at a foundational level that if something's not vague, that makes it not populist. But
Sure.
I'll engage with this as it is. So I think that Ossoff talks about the Trump administration, but he also talks about the way that the corruption of the Trump administration represents how American politics in general has been corrupted. So it's framed through the lens of the Trump administration, but it's pretty obvious to me that he's talking about broader systems. And he himself talks about the broader systems of American politics that in his view have become corrupted.
I guess.
So I don't know if that's quite what you're saying.
Wait here, real quick. So I guess when I'm thinking of all right, fuck me. Never mind. I just lost it. Sorry, you're gone.
Well, I need to listen to what he says then, because from what I heard, it was very much pointed, and he never brought up the fucking broader consultant class, or the elites are not working for you; they're working for themselves.
What do you think about Epstein class?
Can you repeat that? Sorry, I did cut off.
What do you think about Epstein class? He was one of the big popularizers.
That's a populist, definitely populist move, I would say. Yeah.
He was one of the guys that I think Ro Khanna might have said it first, but it really took off after Ossoff used it in a speech.
I see. Well, I can't say like I told you. I only saw a couple of speeches from him, and I was like, damn, that's an attractive dude. That's all I thought. So I need to watch some more videos of that.
Okay. So here's just
we need more hot guys.
Sure. So here's a question. Here's a question that I would have, I guess. So when I say that I have an issue with kind of the branding or the labeling for populism, what do you think my concern is?
I think. Could you say that again?
If I see people like you, so if I see you kind of defending the concept of there can be liberal versions of populism, or there are ways that we can engage with populism that's beneficial to us. What do you think my issue is? How could I possibly have an issue with what you're saying there? What do you think my issue is?
I think that your definition of populism is, and it makes sense why it would be this way, because we live in the world that we live in, is inherently tied to things like lying and illiberalism and probably to some extent like an authoritarian personality. I think that's probably your problem with it. And I think that's probably a lot of people's problems with it.
Do you think that wait, hold on, wait. Okay. Do you think that's my only issue? Is just that like because I have my personal definition, or do you think that's my or I guess what I'm getting at, I guess, is
I think
that one of my big issues is that like I feel like if you were to make the same arguments to say that like Nazism doesn't have to, or like the essentialized race that we can talk about for a Nazi, it could be like the American race, and that we can have everything that Nazis talked about, but like we can just broaden up what like the race of an American is, or something like that, some argument akin to that, and then say there were a bunch of like Nazis in the country that were happy to see that some people were more amenable to these Nazi arguments. The issue that I have, I guess, is that I understand that you have historical examples of populism, and then I understand you have ways that you would want to wield populism, but every single modern iteration that I see of anything that is even remotely populist heavily bends towards this like all or nothing direction in a way that I find both corrosive to our current political discourse and incompatible with like liberal democracy, because it only identifies these broad evil groups of people, and then it precludes any kind of like conversation about politics. It's just all
this is
militant.
why I tried to give some good examples in the video. You know, I think both Ossoff and Tallarico both engage in what I would call populist rhetoric, and I think that I don't see them as a threat to liberal democracy. In fact, I think that their style of politics is probably going to be crucial to saving liberal democracy.
But I guess what I don't see, just one final, hold on, I'm just trying to run this down real quick, hold on. What I don't see is that I feel like every single thing they've said, nothing here necessitates like a huge us versus them thing, or like a huge like identifying classes of people thing. Like when you say that they're engaged,
talking about the Epstein class fits that category.
Definitionally, no, because they're literally referring to Epstein like a particular guy than the people that were involved in covering up. It could, but insofar as it does broaden it to include a greater group of people, I would say these are like deals with the devil that you're making. That maybe you have to be bigoted sometimes, maybe you have to give up on some policies that you want sometimes in order to like win some amount of the population. But like these are bad actions that we're taking ideally towards some like consequentialist positive end, not like something that should be celebrated or seen as like a welcome part of our political system.
Well, I mean, I just disagree with the idea, like I said before, I sort of disagree foundationally with the idea that populism has to be vague in the way that y'all seem to think it has to be. So that's sort of a foundational disagreement that's going to kind of
sure. But then I guess my only question then I guess, and I don't know if I've heard you address this before, my only question would be, what in your mind, what is the difference between just like populist versus like a popular thing?
Well, it's what it's the difference between it's whether or not you're talking about it in the sense of representing the common people as opposed to a corrupt elite. There's plenty of things that are popular that aren't populist.
What's like a popular thing that isn't populist?
Gosh, I don't know. Most things. Puppies, not.
Well, that's not a policy though, because I feel like how many people are recommending political ideas that aren't? Like, I feel like everybody tries to appeal to the popularity of.
That's what I'm saying, man. We live in an age where that is kind of the style of politics. Talking about so a good example of something that's to be less facetious about it. Mm-hmm. Talking like I would not say that talking about like deficit reduction is like a typically populist policy. Now you might be able to frame it as populist.
Yeah, because I would say it definitely is. Because how do people in the United States political system, how do they always talk about the debt and the deficit?
Well, I think this is sort of getting to the problem. Populism is not like a thick ideology. It's a communication style more than, or you sometimes see it referred to as like a thin ideology in the political science literature, but it's not like a thick ideology. You can make a populist appeal to just about anything if you twist it enough. Now, I think some things are more amenable to populism than others. So, for instance, I think like it's going to be pretty hard to have like a person who comes out and says, let's restrict the vote to only people who own property and have that be like a populist thing. Now, you could in theory imagine someone who would campaign on that in like a populist way, but I think that doesn't lend itself to a populist style as well as like, I don't know, like the opposite, expanding the vote.
Sure, I think I don't necessarily disagree with you there, but then I should have qualified a little bit harder. Sorry. The qualification would have been in a democratic system. I feel like every single thing is essentially going to be populist because you're always making appeals to the people to win elections.
I think there's a degree to which that's true, but it's important to qualify that by saying that making an appeal to the people is not the same thing as claiming to represent the people against a corrupt establishment, right? So you can try and convince people that a policy is good on any number of merits, right? You can try and convince them that it's better for their wallet, better for their family in some way, it's the morally correct thing to do. But if you don't say, and this is representing your interests against the interest of a corrupt established elite, I wouldn't call that populist. That's just trying to convince people that a policy is good.
Okay, I need to ask this. My brain can hold the thought so long. Okay, my question though is to Ryan mostly, but also pretty much to everyone. So we have this problem, everyone noticed that, right? That there is a conflation in people's mind that the Democrats and the Republicans are the same. And if our job is to equally corrupt, or they're all the same, all that language is very popular in America right now. And a lot of people feel disenfranchised, disillusioned, and our job, your job, not mine, but your job is to kind of make them excited about the Democratic Party, supporting Democratic Party, like going to vote, all that sort of stuff, right? So Trump does it. That seems like a practical thing, right?
Yeah.
And you think by appealing to the populist stuff, that's how we're gonna energize them, right?
I think it's
my question
it's a
is
potential option.
one of the options too.
One of the options.
Yeah, so
I don't want everyone. I think it's totally fine for people to disagree with what I'm saying. In fact, I think it's probably necessary, or else we'll get to the same situation.
I'm about to do.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So my question is that if that's the core problem, why is that happening? Why do so many people in America consider those two things to be the same when they're not? And that's my biggest problem with the populists, because they conflate those things by design. That's why people like DSA people like Crystal Ball, for example, right? Breaking points. The conflation is by design to make people see that those people are the same. That reduces their energy and their willingness to participate, because why the fuck would you bother if all the people are basically the same sort of shit? If voting for Trump is the same as voting for Kamala, if you listen to people like Hassan, for example, right? Like, who cares? What's the difference? So that's my problem with populism. It's not exactly the same as what Steven says, but that's because that, in my opinion, that's the best tool to make people not support the Democratic Party, support.
I agree that is a horrible, but probably more importantly, just incorrect description of reality. The Republican and Democratic parties are not the same. I think it's important though to be so that is a very popular framing of things in American politics. But I think it's important to think about what are people actually saying whenever they say that the Republicans and Democrats are the same. I don't think that the average voter literally thinks that the Republicans and Democrats are the same. I think we can see this by the fact that people express clear partisan preferences. They clearly don't think that both parties are the same because they vote for.
They do think that. A lot of them think that there's no difference. So what do we do?
But I don't know. That's a great question. I mean, I think that if they're saying that they don't feel like people are standing up for the average person, if they don't feel like people are working for them hard enough, you have to appeal to them.
Yeah, but the populists, the guys you say are good, are the ones doing that. They are the ones who imprinted that thought into people's mind that there's no difference. If they're all Gaza genocide, whatever the fuck, or the AIPAC, or like all of that language, Epstein class, whatever, right? If all of them are part of it, then like what's the difference? And that seems to be the prominent feeling I catch from people. And how does populism solve it? It doesn't. It creates it, though, is my problem.
I just don't think that saying that the Republicans and Democrats are the same is a necessary component of populism.
Okay, fine. I give up. It's gonna be the definition battle again, and it's just.
Well, but this is what I'm. This is what I'm saying, right? Like, if you disagree with the definition of populism, that's fine. That's also that's not really the point of the video. The point of the video and the kind of
I'm not. I think the video, from what I've seen, the video seems good. It's just that I'm not concerned about it. I told Steven immediately that I think that's a correct shit you said there. Like, you know, it's just that your prescription is what I'm worried about. So what do we do about it is what I'm worried about.
What do you think we should do to sort of give liberalism a little more energy?
I'm too Eastern European to answer questions like that without cringing. So I don't like giving advice to people about their own country. But to me, the problem
Steven,
is
what do you think liberalism?
I don't think that's the populism is your answer, is my big problem. Like, what exactly you should do instead of it, I can't say exactly. You know, I don't live there. It's not my. But like, the problem is that when your big problem is that fake news, the internet, the absolute calamity that is going on in journalism in America right now, the disinformation, the malicious foreign actors that are also participating in destroying people's trust and people's participation. There's a lot of factors, obviously, right? But the problem is that when you elevate people and elevate the verbiage, the language of people who say that all the people are the same and we are fighting against the corrupt elites, against the donor class, against the consultants, against all of that populist shit, right? And you just brought that problem that people already have of not seeing that those parties are not the same, not even remotely the same. And it's not that Democrats are perfect, but in comparison to fucking MAGA, they might as well be. But it's just
say those things because they're not.
But how do you stop them from saying that? That's quite literally populism, and that's how people engage in populism in your country. That's how people call themselves populism engage with it.
Well, this is why I tried to give some examples of people who I thought were doing this in a good way.
Yeah, but how do you make the lads who are doing it and the ladies? Sorry, Crystal Ball, but like, how do we make her not do that? She is a populist.
You can't force her to stop doing what she wants to do. There's nothing you can do to stop her from doing what she wants to do.
Like, what? They're not doing it the way you're saying, though. They're not doing it by criticizing.
They're not also the examples that I'm holding up as like good examples.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, but I think there's a conflation there in people's mind when you say, listen, this is my definition of populism, and like, this is how I see it could be used for the forces of good, basically, right? This is how I see it could be used practically and to make things better. But like, how do your audience, for example, listening to you, then they go, oh, let me check out that fucking populism, and then they check it out and it's Crystal Ball. So what do?
Well, I don't think that's gonna be the result for my.
I mean, it's a little bit comedic, but I'm not saying they're like your fans are fans of Crystal Ball, obviously, right? But a cursed woman, Jesus Christ. But
I mean, I can see the audience overlap in my YouTube studio. I think I'm okay on that front.
Like, how do you like not? If you're like, I understand that what you're saying is not the same as what she's saying. You know, I'm not saying that. Obviously, it's not the same. But so you have different aim, though. Your aim is to use that to make Democrats and liberalism stronger.
Right.
And her goal is the opposite of that.
Sure, right. So, but that's why populism is not like an ideology in the sense of like liberalism or socialism or nationalism even. You know, nationalism.
Centrist populist. That's true. I agree with you on that. It's not a political ideology exactly. But it's just that how do we differentiate those two things? If we're using your like definition, so not to argue about definitions, right? If we are like, okay, fine, Ryan has his own vision and he thinks that will work. So how do you then separate those two things when the people who call themselves populist in your country are doing what I'm saying populism is? So
I think that we can call them what they are ideologically. So in many cases they are socialists. In many cases they are something close to a kind of neo-fascist ideology, I think. And I think that is why they are bad. That is the defining characteristic of why they are bad. And so I think we should criticize them on that basis. We should call them, communists, Marxist-Leninists, fascists. I think that's why they're bad. So that's what I would criticize them for.
Yeah, I certainly would agree that's why they're bad, but I also think that populism is quite literally a prerequisite for fascist and communist movements. So I don't know. I'm just saying that.
I think it's a prerequisite for a lot of popular political movements. I mean, I find it sort of incredible whenever people. Sorry, that sounds too mean. But whenever people talk about the American Revolution not being populist, I mean, I think it's just. It seems to me that whenever you learn about that period, whenever you see like John Adams, who, by the way, was not a populist at all, he. There was a very funny moment actually in that debate with Lonerbox where he brought this up and talked about like John Adams' opinion on populism. But anyway, he also said, without the pen of Thomas Paine, the sword of Washington would have been raised in vain, right? And Thomas Paine, the great pamphleteer of the American Revolution, was an unadulterated populist. I mean, calling your pamphlet to start a revolution common sense, and then talking about how in the sight of God, one honest man is worth more than all.
None of this is populism to me. Like I don't want to bug down on definitions again. I understand, you're not gonna budge on that. I'm not gonna budge either. But it's just
call common sense the pamphlet a populist work.
No, I would not. I mean, I didn't. It's just anyway, dude. It's not gonna move anywhere. So let's not do that. We don't want longer.
I think I would just encourage people to really read that and think about whether or not it's populist. I think
do mind though that my populism, the way I see things, is very much instructed by how populism was used mostly in my part of the world. So I will obviously admit that. So I'm more educated on that, on the historical events and the revolutions and all that business that happened here. And also I acknowledge that your perspective is obviously more informed by the Western type of stuff. So yeah, what pops in my mind is probably not the same that pops in your mind. So I don't think we should talk about.
I think any definition of populism that doesn't include Thomas Paine's common sense is a pretty impoverished definition of populism, is what I would say.
Yours includes fucking everything, so I don't know.
Well, no, it doesn't. It's very specific. It includes what Mr. Mooten said about political movements that aim to represent the interests of the common people against the interests of a corrupt elite. I think that's exactly what common sense did, and I think that's why it's populist.
Well, I don't want to make this a stupid one. Never mind, keep on.
Yeah, let's not. It's gonna be definition fight. I don't want to.
I'm curious though, if we agree that liberalism has this problem where it doesn't feel interesting, it feels.
I just want to answer this because you keep saying that common sense was populist, but it wasn't about like the elite against like the common man, right?
Absolutely, it was.
Thomas Paine, Adams, Washington, these were like elitely educated people. They were well educated. They were in the highest echelons of society. My guess is if he could write well enough to do a pamphlet, I'm shooting in the dark there. Was he not? Was that a common man, the common farmer or whatever?
Among the founders, yeah, he was pretty common.
Okay, when you say among the founders, I mean like in general, compared to the average colonist, would Thomas Paine have been considered like just a working?
Well, no, he wrote a very successful pamphlet, but before that, he was a total failure in everything he did in life. He came to the colonies because he was poor and a failure and got fired from like every job.
So he got to go to the colonies though.
Well, stop. I'm not trying to fucking make this a 2v1 3v1. Okay, sorry. Okay, the reason why it doesn't seem like a populist thing as much is because it sounds like whatever definition that you're crafting here is essentially making it so that any kind of uprising against any kind of thing can be a populist thing. Whereas when I look at the American Revolution, that was not like what. Okay, well, I guess when I think
it's only if you're claiming to represent the interests of the common person against the interests of a corrupt elite. That is the defining characteristic.
Sure, but it wasn't the common person.
So, for instance, like
not for instance. On the American Revolution, that wasn't the common person against a corrupt elite. That was the colonists in North America against like the English crown.
You think that I think that is exactly how they understood it. That is exactly how they understood it.
Okay, I mean, I'm sure. Wait. I'm not trying to make this a dog pile. Sorry. Hold on. I guess what my issue is that like I'm looking at like a particular political situation, and Hold on. The crown was not necessarily like corrupt, right? Like technically these colonies existed as colonies of England, right? Like if the king wants to tax you some amount, you have no say in it, right? He's the fucking king. If that's how he wanted to, I guess if that's how they treated colonies at the time, the revolution was against like that political thing, like that idea of a monarchy versus we wanted more tyranny, of a republic.
It was against the tyranny of the monarchy and against the system of being under
but I'm
the
saying it
monarchy.
was against like a particular form of government. Like it happened to be popular because we gravitated towards like a republic or a democracy afterwards, of course. But I guess it didn't look. That wasn't like just like a corrupt. Or do you recognize, or do you think, or do you agree with me? I shouldn't say you recognize, because maybe you disagree. Do you agree with me that like revolting against like a monarchy because you want a democracy, that the monarchy is a thing, that's not just like a popular appeal against like a corrupt elite, or is that like in your mind, is that the same thing?
I think that is how they understood it at the time. That the monarchy was.
But I'm saying right now,
corrupt, and not even just like the monarchy. It was the monarchy, but it was also the fact that the monarchy. So, I mean, corruption was absolutely part of the situation. But I don't want to get into the historical rundown of the American Revolution because I probably, I just don't think it's going to be super productive. But okay. I do think that corruption and specifically the fact that the crown would do things like they would suspend the local governments in the colonies and they would bring in their other people who were, not loyal to the people on the ground. They were loyal to the crown. They made money for the interests of the crown. I think I would read through Common Sense, and I would read through some of the grievances in the Declaration of Independence. I mean,
sure.
I think that is exactly how they understood it.
But did the average British citizen, I guess, vibe with the American citizens and wanted to all go join the Americans, or did they also like try to revolt against the crown after, like immediately after the Revolutionary War or whatever? Or well, because it felt more like the colonists versus the crown, and they wanted to basically revolt and break away and create their own state.
Right, but why did they want to do that? Was it just a philosophical commitment to the ideal of like a republic?
Well, I mean, there's going to be some philosophical commitment to democracy, but it probably boils down to like a material enriching that, like, I'm getting screwed over by the crown. They're literally, of course, well, these things probably run a tandem with each other.
The work that famously turned the average American colonist in favor of a war for independence, because at this time it was still an open question whether or not there could be like reconciliation with, the mother country. The work that famously turned the average American against the idea of reconciliation was Common Sense, and it explicitly frames things as like the oppressed colonist who's having their rights and money and dignity stripped away by the crown and the mother country, and he frames it as a corrupt and ridiculous state of affairs that has to be ended.
Yeah, but they're talking about ending absolute monarchy and change it to something completely new. So to create a completely.
Why did they want to do that? They wanted to get rid of the monarchy because
faction monarchy. That's not populism.
Right, but
okay, we're gonna do this.
The reason they wanted to get rid of the monarchy, and Thomas Paine's Rights of Man, his later book, where he was responding to Edmund Burke's work on the French Revolution, explains this a little better, actually. But
wait, do you consider French Revolution populist?
Do I consider? Well,
French Revolution, yeah.
It was a long period of time. There were populist moments and decidedly not populist moments in the French Revolution. It was
broadly, like not that it had some elements that you can qualify as appeals to the common man, because pretty much every revolution would have appeals to the common man. But because you want to energize the fucking common man to do the revolution.
I would say in 1789, that was a pretty. I would say the period between 1789 and I think until the Thermidorian reaction, it was a pretty populist movement, and then there were spurts, fits and starts of populism between the Thermidorian reaction and the end of the Napoleonic Wars.
Okay, I think I see the problem now. That it's just that why we disagree pretty much. I don't think it's like salvageable, because in your mind, basically, if you have the people who present themselves as representing the common people against the current sort of like elite power institutions, right? Then that's populism, basically, and just it's just not. In my opinion, it can have an element of populist rhetoric, for sure.
That's what I've been saying the whole time, right? That populism, the essential element.
But I just don't agree with it, and there's nothing we can do about it. So there you go.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks for the comment.
That's sort of how I expected it to go. But yeah, I mean, I would encourage people to read Common Sense. Tell me whether or not you think that is a document that is aiming to represent the interests of the common people against a corrupt elite. I think it pretty obviously is.
Do you think that if the crown had been, I guess in your sense, corrupt, but just operated within all the boundaries, or how are you defining corrupt here? Like as a monarchy, do you think that they'd be okay with it, or?
Yes, I do. I think if the crown had not behaved so poorly towards the colonists, there would not have been the revolution. Yeah, and we can see that based on the fact that there was no revolution in.
But always how revolution happen, though. They don't happen when people are satisfied with the order they have. So Maidan Revolution, for example, in my country, was not fucking populism at all, but it sure was popular. So those are two different things. We were fighting against the government and the regime and their attempt to make the country authoritarian, but we're not fighting against the corrupt elites. We're not fighting against the particular the government in itself was not ever presented as the domain of the corrupt elites who are oppressing the common people, and the common people need to rise up against them.
Yeah.
And
I think that's a good example of the difference between any sort of revolt or revolution or popular movement and populism. I mean, so I'm certainly not going to sit here and lecture you on your own country. Sounds like that was not an important component, and I take your word for it.
I will say, though, people did speak about corruption quite a bit, because obviously we are post-Soviet, poor as fuck country, so the corruption is a big problem. And people talked about corruption back then, and they still speak about it quite a bit. And it's something that everyone cares about and cared about back then. But the problem is that there is one thing to speak about corruption in general, right? And there is a completely different spin would be if all the elites are corrupt and the ruling class is corrupt, and we need to scratch that shit and, change it and destroy the institutions because they're corrupt and they're not working for our benefit. That was not how it was ever presented. Okay. So I would say that's not, would you agree that that's not populist then? In nature, even if there are appeals to the people.
Absolutely. If that's the way that it was, then of course.
Okay. I feel like we've hit philosophical bedrock. I think we're circling the drain on our.
Yeah, I also think so. Yeah, I don't want to
If you wish to preserve your native country uncontaminated by European corruption, you must in secret wish a separation. That's like the kind of language that Thomas Paine talks in in common sense.
I mean,
Talking
it's
about the bribery, corruption, and favoritism of the crown, taking a tenth of your.
That's what I brought through Maidan example for you.
Okay, we're
because
never
it's the same.
agreeing on this. We're never agreeing on this. We're circling around this so hard. Okay, we're we're good. We're
Okay,
not.
like fine. I'm sorry. I don't
You're
want to
good.
be like for group. Yeah, but still, thank you. I appreciate the conversation. I think I understand what do you mean exactly, and I will be less pissed off from now on.
Hey, well, good talking.
Yeah, that's a bonus. I think that's a plus. Yeah. Anyways, I shall go then, I guess.
Be careful. Stay safe.
Yeah. Bye.
Well, Stephen, I don't want to sit here and bogart the stream time.
Bogart away.
Is there anything else? Is there anything else from the video that you had questions on?
I think one of the broad things I've said, I don't know if we talked about this or if this is just what I was talking about before you hopped in, is sometimes it feels like there are certain things in society that have significantly changed us that don't like play into a political side very well. Meaning, like nobody can weaponize the issue for like a political end. And one of those huge things that I point to a lot, and a lot of people kind of agree, is like the internet. It has dramatically changed like so much of how American life is. And then as a result of that, we try to, sometimes I think we're looking to get things out of other things because something is missing, but we can't quite articulate what that thing is. So in a broad sense, I would say like looking for meaning from our political ideology, like liberalism, and then maybe in a narrower sense, I could give an example of like, I'm sure if you follow any politics, you've heard of like the insufficiency of Ken Martin at the DNC or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is like the first time in my human life I have ever heard that we need to be getting some kind of like big leadership from the DNC. I don't even know how many Americans even know what it is, but I feel like it's like the same type of problem where it's like something is failing, so people are kind of looking at like everything, and so like it must be the DNC is what's failing us. It must be Ken Martin. And it's like, well, is it really? And then that's kind of how I feel like the liberalism type thing, right? Yeah.
I think personally, that the DNC Ken Martin stuff is a lot of DNC insider baseball that's playing out in the public realm. There was a lot of bad blood from that DNC race, like who ended up getting the spot. Like the Pod Save guys were super boosters for Wickler.
Wickler, probably, yeah.
Yeah. And so some of the stuff with Ken Martin, I think, is a whole load of DNC insider baseball that's playing out in the public domain. So I agree with you. The DNC chair has never been really anything more than a figurehead or maybe chief fundraiser is probably what their job description is in the modern era anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I agree with you there. I do think that there's a little more credibility to the attacks on congressional leadership for not doing a good enough job being leaders. That has been a role that congressional leadership has taken in the past. So I think that kind of criticism has a little bit more legitimacy. I mean, famously on the Republican side, Newt Gingrich was like defining the Republican Party for his generation.
Sure.
So I think there's a little bit of criticism there that's valid.
Mm-hmm. But there might be. I think that. Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I'm like a broken record when I argue this stuff. So I don't know how much you've heard it. So I don't want to drone on too much. But like, I guess to reiterate, I feel like one of my big things that I fixated on is kind of this on how much the Republican establishment is kind of aligned on objectives. Mm-hmm. And so there are things that the Republican establishment does really well that the liberal establishment doesn't do well. So we end up looking at things like, what is our message? How did we talk about this issue? Like, did we signal on this thing correctly? When the reality is the Republicans kind of think about that, but the most important thing they have is like the messaging apparatus, right? That if I were to go,
can I complicate this a little bit?
Yeah, go.
I think one of the things that the Republicans have that Democrats don't have is a sense of like conservatism. I think that there is like a whole apparatus of people who are like into conservatism, and obviously that's affiliated with the Republican Party, but it's like ultimately like an ideology that is sort of apart from, it's like it's not an appendage of the Republican Party. They see conservatism as the ideology that like should be controlling the Republican Party, not the other way around.
I think I would
and
have,
I think,
or you finish if you want. Go ahead.
Oh no, I just think on the Democratic side, it's hard for me to there's very few groups, think tanks, whatever you want to say, that are out there talking about like liberalism as an ideology that, you know, not concerned necessarily with electoral politics, just talking about making the best case possible for the ideology. Whereas on the right, you have like the Heritage Foundation that makes a very clear ideological case for their brand of conservatism. And they are not so concerned about like just the electoral politics of it all. That's not what they see their role as. But electoral politics, I think, has really swallowed a lot of the kind of infrastructure behind the Democratic Party in a way that I think is unhelpful for the vitality of liberalism as an ideology.
Sure. So I can agree in part and disagree in part. I do agree that they have these things that are operating in such a way that where they don't just see themselves concerned about kind of with ideology, or I'm sorry, not with ideology. I'm sorry, with like political, I guess like voting or whatever. But I think that the reason why it's so effective over there is because it is all connected. So, for instance,
it's connected for sure.
But the important part,
people they go and work in the.
But the only reason why it works is because it's connected. If it wasn't connected, nobody would know. The only reason why we care about the Federalist Society or the Heritage Foundation, or whatever, is because Project 2025 is real, and that's where all the justice the judge picks come from for the Republican side.
Absolutely,
So they have these ways of kind of like establishing, of connecting all these different parts that are working very effectively, but they all work like a single organ system or whatever, like a body. Whereas on the Democratic side, everything is far more discreetly done, and sometimes, well, not sometimes, almost always are in like active hostility with one another.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that, and I think that's an important thing to point out, that they're connected in that way. I think one thing that's important to note is that, like, the Republican staffers that come up through these things, like the Claremont Institute or whatever else, you know, they see it as like important for the future, I guess, leaders of the Republican Party to have the proper schooling in the conservative ideology. And that's something that they take very seriously. And I don't think that that's something that liberals take very seriously. I think liberals don't have a very good sense of themselves.
Sure. So I understand exactly what you're saying, but I'm going to feed it back exactly into what I was saying before. And that the reason why liberals don't have that is because we don't connect all of our infrastructure around. So,
but why don't we do that is what I'm saying. Like, I would contend that the reason we don't do that is because for a long time, liberals didn't think that ideology was very important. They didn't think that that was an important part of politics.
I understand what you're saying. I guess this is such a macro, multidiscipline argument. I mean, obviously, you have your idea. I'm like, I'll give my opinion, but I'm not any more confident necessarily in mine. But like, I would say it was because there was a good trick that was played, obviously on the media side. I think I'm going to focus on my media. That Republicans saw the media that existed in the United States, and they made this decision for all of America that the media is the left wing, and we're going to make our media that's the right wing. When in reality, the media was just people trying to do media, generally with some partisanship. But now, after doing that, now you have like CNN, MSNBC, all these people are, and the New York Times, the Washington Post, these are all cast as like left-wing media, while Fox News is right-wing media. And then the average American sees these two things as equally partisan, not realizing that the entire right-wing media apparatus is all working in sync with the Republican Party, such that even if we go down to fundamental things like, think about like college kids. College kids are oftentimes very at end with the Democratic Party because they're more radical to the left. But then if you look at like, imagine like Turning Point USA, this might as well have been an arm of the official Republican Party, right? Like it, yeah. And so I think that Republicans have this, now that they've figured this out, they have this top down, and I think I would argue the MLs, the Tankies, the far lefty, the DSA types, they figured this out as well, where you have this top down structure, and the center left people still see themselves as objective, and as long as they see themselves as objective and not trying to be part of like a political or political activist movement, they will always be behind the.
Even you're speaking my language. This is my whole deal. So I'm totally with you on this. This is my whole deal. So I very much agree with you on this.
Yeah, I don't know then, but the problem then is that like, so if I have conversations with really large people that I think everybody in the United States consider on the left, they will say what I just said. They'll say, well, I don't see myself as an activist. I see myself as a journalist. I see myself as a video essayist. I don't think it's my job to work for the Democratic Party, which I respect. And in a well-functioning environment, I think your job is essential. That should be the case. But in a media environment where everybody who's on the right sees themselves as an extension of the Republican Party, and 90% of people on the left see themselves as like trying to be objective journalists, that system is like fundamentally flawed because it always favors the right-wing messaging there because they're not even trying to be honest, you know?
Yeah, well, I think, I agree that people shouldn't just, I think that the pretense that a lot of people have about being like journalists or objective reporters that can be like outside of the political process. I agree. I don't see myself, someone asked me the other day, how I think about my role in the space. Like, do I consider myself a journalist? And I said, no, because I don't do any original reporting. I do like analysis, like I'm not out there making calls, trying to uncover like Watergate, like Woodward and Bernstein. I'm a political commentator. I think I was quoted in an article one time as a political analyst, and that's maybe as far as I would go.
Sure.
I think, but I see my role, I see my sort of mission with my platform as trying to advance a more well thought out ideological form of liberalism.
Sure.
I see that as my role. And I sort of welcome people that are willing to engage and disagree with my worldview on it, as long as we agree that it's important for liberalism to have an ideology, that it can't just be like the background radiation of politics that no one has to pay attention to. Because if everyone just agreed with my sort of idea of what liberalism is, I think we'd get to the same point that we're at now, in my view, where liberalism is viewed as this kind of stale thing with no motion and no blood and no energy. So it's good to talk to people on the kind of liberal side of things that disagree with my worldview for liberalism. I'm happy to do it, as long. But I think the crucial thing is, like what you said, recognizing that liberalism is not just. You have to actually fight for it. To, I guess, paraphrase what you said. I don't remember exactly what it is that you said.
You need to actively defend.
Yeah,
this is a big issue when I debated like all the anti-woke people back in 2016 and onwards, was that like people would talk about like consent around the Me Too era, or like affirmative action, and then that became DEI or wokeism in general. And then when somebody would ask, like sometimes people would get really fundamental with these questions, like, well, women and men aren't the same. Women, don't get drafted. Why should they have the right to vote? I started to realize very quickly, like, nobody actually had any answer to any of these questions. Nobody actually knew. I don't know, why should the races and women have equal rights, and like, should we even allow everybody to vote the same? Like nobody seemed to know the answer to any of these questions, which was kind of scary. Yeah.
John Stuart Mill. This is an old problem. John Stuart Mill, in his famous book On Liberty, which lots of people who were in college might have had to read part of that. He talks about this idea of dead dogma. Whenever something becomes so accepted that you no longer think that it's important, you don't have to argue for it anymore, and you don't get inoculated against like basically the bad ideas because you never have to contend with them. I think that's kind of what happened with liberalism in the period of like the end of the Cold War to now, now in a broad sense, maybe till 2016, where the basic tenets of liberal democracy were basically accepted, and we just didn't know how. We lost the ability to contend with ideas like communism or ethno-nationalism, because they were not active participants in American politics at the time.
Sure.
The whole game was talking about policy, how to make the marginal policy improvements from where we are now. That's very important. I mean, that's obviously very important work. That's where the real bread and butter of politics, that's where things actually get done. But whenever there's not a broad agreement on those fundamental principles, someone has to be arguing for the principles. And that's, I guess, what I'm trying to do on my YouTube channel. Not always in a way that everyone agrees with, but doing what I think is best.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I think those should absolutely be done. Yeah, I guess I would argue there are bigger like forces right now that are preventing, I would say, like the best faith engagement with that from happening, which I think is where a lot of the, or at least for me, that's where a lot of my populist hatred comes from. So like an example of this might be, and I've said this before, like my main contention, and I'm not trying to drag you into the fucking internet wars between me and Hassan. I don't want.
Please
don't.
don't.
I don't need to be.
Let me tell you, man. Anytime and I'm looking forward to it after this. Anytime I talk to you, I get emails.
Yeah, I know. It's fine. It's all part of the strategy. It's all part of the strategy. Yeah, that's unfortunate, but that's how they function. Yeah.
Anyway, so
so what I'm saying is that like if somebody wanted to come to me and somebody was like, I am a socialist. I think we should abolish all capital. I don't like. I think that there's like fundamental flaws with the natural tension between whatever. Then I would fiercely disagree with this person. But let's have the debate. Fuck it. I think I could defend a liberal capitalist system really well. I don't think most capitalists could. My issue right now politically is because. And we don't have to get into the populist thing. I'm not asking you to agree with me, but I'm saying from my perspective, the reason why I have an issue with a lot of the populist framing is because I would argue, it lets them set things up as like an us versus them. It gets them past the policy arguments, and then it makes it so that they can start to make a bunch of arguments that I would argue aren't being made in good faith. So like a big example of this would be somebody like, I'll just make up a person and call them Masan, would say something like, oh, like, I just want people to have affordable health care. And it's like, well, that's not, most of the Democrats already believe that. There's a lot of liberals that believe this, but they want to get past the policy argument and just argue for their figures. But then we don't actually have any of the, like, the mode of economic production arguments or anything like that. And it's that, but because of their political project, and then again, I'm not asking you to accept this. I'm just saying from my perspective, because they are populist, they see themselves as like, because this is such an us versus them thing, we can start to use what some people might consider less than savory forms of argumentation to further our things, even if that means misrepresenting our point of view, misrepresenting our politics or whatever else. And then that's like the huge hang up that I'm in. If we were having a massive debate right now in the United States over like, should we become socialist versus should we remain capitalist, whatever, I think that would be a fascinating conversation. And like, I'm not one to push back on a society and say, this is evil for us to move in this direction. If it truly is what most people want, assuming you don't have like slavery or some, fundamental like, use Kogan's or Malaman say horrible thing like that. But when the conversation is being misrepresented, then it almost doesn't matter to me what the policy thing is or what the ideology is. I would say, well, this is not good. I think that this type of like lying is not like a part of what I would ever want in any political system.
I think what I would say is that liberals have not had to contend with those kinds of ideologies for we're stuck in the mind prison. We're stuck in the mind prison that the most important thing that someone like that the most important thing that someone can believe is like their specific policy views. Like that is not the most important thing about someone like J.D. Vance. His specific policy views are not the most important thing about his ideology. It's not the most important thing about the Marxist-Leninists on the DSA National Political Committee or whatever it's called. That's not the most important thing about them is not their opinion on whether or not the Senate should exist or whatever. That's not the most important thing about them. But we've been stuck in the mind prison of like never having to engage with ideologies and ideas for so long that I think a lot of liberals just don't have the practice or the ability or even maybe the ability to even recognize that that's like an important part of what they should be doing is like pushing back on the ideas. So, I mean, I think what I'm trying to do is just encourage people to do that a little more. But yeah, I mean, I agree that
it reminds me of the that fucking government show. Fuck that, I never watched it. Not House of Cards. Oh my god, the other one that everybody talks about. That's West like from Wing? The 90s. Yeah, the West Wing or whatever, where they show the guys the fucking Constitution and they're like, oh, they found problems in it and they don't know if it's a good enough Constitution. And then the guy tries to express like, well, it's not really about like the particular form of government, or it's not about the particular rules. It's like imbuing on people some broad idea of, what it means to have a system like this. And like, that's the really important thing that people need to take away from it more than any particular rule or whatever.
That's, straight out of Enlightenment philosophy. Rousseau talks about how the most important law is not written on any piece of paper. It is written in the hearts of the citizens. And that is basically to mean that if people don't, in their hearts, support the ideals that underpin a government, the government will eventually fail. So if we don't have people out there making arguments for the fundamentals of liberalism, and taking seriously what those ideals mean for politics, then I think liberalism is at a dead end.
Sure. And it should be, right? Because the people, it's literally a government, buying
Exactly.
for the people. And
Yeah.
if the people no longer vibe with it for whatever reason, then
Exactly.
Sure.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Thanks for chatting.
Yeah. I love you. Be careful. Stay safe, buddy.
Everyone go watch the video. Okay. Bye.
Peace.
That guy, am I
Jesus.
right?
Sometimes the call turns into like a fucking, like a Thunderdome. We just gotta take deep breaths and be chill.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.